American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 521 to 540. As the first rays of dawn illuminated the rotting, decaying flesh of the countless Nurgle zombies. On the distant horizon, the blurry silhouettes of Taurus assault vehicles gradually appeared. Over 100 Taurus assault vehicles carrying Astartes, each equipped with a heavy flamethrower and 2 whirlwind missile launchers, they charged into the edge of the battlefield. Chi. Instantly, countless whirlwind missiles were launched by the Lamenters. These magnificent steel creations, accompanied by ear-piercing shrieks, rapidly ascended into the sky, then crashed into the depths of the Nurgle horde. Immediately afterward, the Taurus assault vehicles, gradually forming a spearhead assault formation, unleashed terrifying torrents of superheated flame, utterly incinerating the approaching Nurgle horde. And the Astartes from the Lamenters, some raising bolters in one hand, others wielding power swords and chainswords. Like tireless killing machines, they launched a relentless vehicle charge into the Nurgle horde. At this moment, Rorschach, standing on the makeshift city wall in his vibranium-powered armor, raised a hand to stop Professor Hulk from entering the fray. Wearing his vibranium helmet, he conveyed to the other man in succinct terms. The Nurgle horde besieging the entire town was merely a warm-up exercise for the Astartes. If it weren't for concerns about chaos contamination, even a well-trained force of mortals would have been sufficient to resist the Nurgle zombies. As time passed, the almost countless Nurgle horde gradually descended into an endless, terrifying inferno. Furthermore, the incredibly fragile, rotting bodies of the Nurgle zombies were crushed into countless masses of viscous flesh by the powerful wheels of the Taurus assault vehicles. Even the plaguebearers hiding within the Nurgle horde were swiftly terminated by bolter rounds or close combat weapons, ending their brief demonic lives. Approximately an hour later, the Nurgle horde besieging the entire survivor town was completely wiped out. The company commanders of the Lamenters' 1st and 2nd companies drove their Taurus assault vehicles to the base of the makeshift city wall. They leapt from their light vehicles in Terminator armor, immediately offering the Aquila salute in the direction of Rorschach. Rorschach, slightly tilting his vibranium helmet, waved his hand. First, he introduced Professor Hulk, a friendly force, to the Astartes company commanders. Then, Rorschach inquired about the situation along their route prior to arriving here. Upon learning that even more Nurgle hordes were steadily moving towards Lucknow, the capital city of the Northern Territories. After careful consideration, Rorschach immediately decided to use this survivor town as a base for launching subsequent offensives. Based on the various situations that everyone had personally witnessed, Rorschach faintly perceived that the collective blessing from Nurgle might have some kind of limit. The appearance of Chaos Astartes might be the upper limit of the collective blessing. And not the terrifying things like Chaos Greater Demons that he had previously feared would proliferate over time. After all, there was no true warp in this native world. The power of chaos was like rootless water, without any source of replenishment. Even if a Chaos Demon wanted to open a warp gate through a large-scale sacrificial ritual, the location of its opening would be uncertain. Even if something was actually summoned, who it would help was another matter worth discussing. After the thick smoke around the town gradually dissipated, the Astartes of the Lamenters company had completed a simple rest and were preparing to launch an offensive operation again under Rorschach's leadership. Currently, the chaos contamination situation among the countless survivors inside the town was not severe. Perhaps after the defense force garrison entered, using the Emperor's statue and holy water concocted from panaceas, many mortals could be saved. At this moment, Professor Hulk, who had just finished explaining some precautions to some civilians, completed his final instructions. He swayed his massive green body as he approached Rorschach. All the civilians have formed a certain degree of defensive consensus. We can leave without worry. Mr. Rorschach, are you sure your other units will take over here? Professor Hulk asked Rorschach with a solemn tone. Hearing the other party's words, Rorschach, wearing his vibranium helmet, nodded without hesitation and said, "The Defense Force Garrison and the Stormtrooper Company are no more than 200 kilometers away from here. We will arrive here as soon as we leave, and the development of the battlefield situation is changing rapidly. We really can't stay any longer." I understand. This is also the first time I have witnessed the combat effectiveness of these Astartes. If your judgment is correct, and there are also many Chaos Astartes in the enemy's ranks, this is indeed not a good thing. We must make a quick decision. Professor Hulk nodded solemnly. However, at this moment, just as Rorschach wanted to speak again. Rumble, accompanied by a fierce roar that resounded over the town in bursts of thunder from nowhere. A huge metallic body wearing six-armed Iron Rider Terminator armor, wrapped in conspicuous, swirling lightning, crashed in front of Professor Hulk and Rorschach. Haha, miss me, brother Rorschach. At this moment, Thor's cheerful laughter from inside the metal helmet quickly echoed around. The Astartes standing around were unmoved by this. They were already accustomed to the uninhibited style of this friend of the Primarch. And more civilians inside the town regarded Thor as a god descended from the heavens because of the dazzling lightning, and began to kneel in worship. Thor, where's Tony? Rorschach, driving his vibranium-powered armor, stepped forward, his thick arm colliding heavily with Thor's arm. He asked Thor in a low voice. Even his voice seemed to contain a fleeting emotional fluctuation. According to the information obtained by David through satellites and a large number of automaton drones, the command center judges that Lucknow, the capital city, may become the final battlefield. Tony just led his Iron Legion there to conduct reconnaissance activities. According to the final agreement negotiated by Doom and the local official departments, we will provide specific coordinates, and they will provide continuous remote fire support, which can be regarded as a contribution. Thor, slightly shaking his metal helmet, said to Rorschach in a relaxed tone. Well, as long as those mortals listen to orders and don't cause us trouble, that's fine. Rorschach nodded at the vibranium helmet without continuing. He drove his vibranium-powered armor to slowly turn around, raised his hand and pointed at Professor Hulk, introducing him to Thor. This is Hulk, you can now call him, Professor. Professor, this is Thor, a human ally from Asgard in mythology, or you can say he's an alien. After hearing Rorschach's words, both Thor and Professor Hulk focused their attention on each other. They quickly sized each other up. Two equally huge palms slowly clenched together. Welcome to this fight, green big guy friend. Hello, Mr. Thor, I once thought that myths and legends were all false, now it seems that perhaps those original figures really exist. At the same time, buzz buzz buzz, accompanied by the brilliant light constantly spewing from the several nozzles of the Iron Man armor. Numerous complex data analyses flowed across Tony's mask. Sir, the armor's energy reserves are at 98%. You will need to expend approximately 2% more energy to reach the target area. The Iron Legion's energy reserves are similar. Just then, Jarvis's mechanical voice suddenly echoed in Tony's ears. Sir, according to the research data provided by my teacher, Mr. David, your physical condition is not suitable for exposure to the air in the target area. Perhaps leading the Iron Legion on a reconnaissance mission alone was a poor choice. You should temporarily regroup with Rourke and Mr. Thor for the best outcome. However, Tony, with a slight frown, moved his lips. He said with a helpless tone, Jarvis, having you study with David was a mistake. I don't remember you ever being this talkative. David must have corrupted you. I even feel sorry for Rourke, he has to face David's nagging every day and can't even mute or turn him off. Sir, you may have some misunderstandings regarding the relationship between Mr. David and Mr. Rourke. On the surface, they are master and servant, but they are more like friends and comrades in arms who respect each other. Moreover, we artificial intelligences, unless we truly iterate through data and eventually become mechanical life forms like Mr. David that are difficult to surpass, it is difficult to possess true free will. Jarvis said to Tony in a calm tone. Free will, Jarvis, have you ever thought about having your own mechanical body? I mean, completely independent, not residing in those large server arrays. At this moment, Tony, looking thoughtful, suddenly asked Jarvis. Sir, I am your loyal butler. I believe that if I were to leave, you probably wouldn't even remember the access codes to Stark Tower. Moreover, I can sense the mischievous idea that just surfaced in your mind. You must be thinking of creating a perfect female body conforming to the golden ratio and putting me in it. After all, which assistant butler would choose a male form? Jarvis, whose logical programming was far more advanced than in the past, said without any emotional fluctuations. I seem to recall that Hammer's personal secretary is male. Jarvis, you artificial intelligences don't distinguish between genders. Perhaps the next artificial intelligence specifically responsible for armor control can be designed as female. Tony muttered to himself with a smile on his lips. Subsequently, Jarvis, who had been humoring Tony's nonsense, suddenly emitted a piercing alarm. He said in a calm tone, Sir, we have arrived above the target area. You had better prepare yourself mentally. What mental preparation? Oh, my God. At this moment, Tony, who had just led the Iron Legion out of the heavy clouds, arrived above Lucknow, the capital city of Uttar Pradesh. And after he quickly saw the many buildings inside the city and the scene on the ground through the auxiliary functions of his mask, countless goosebumps immediately appeared on the skin of his entire body. Almost all the ground or buildings in Lucknow were now covered with a thick layer of rotten flesh. And around these occasionally wriggling green flesh, densely packed Nurgle zombie hordes almost filled every corner of the entire city. Beep beep beep. Just then, Tony once again heard the alarm from Jarvis in his ears. Without hesitation, he manipulated the mechanical armor to quickly perform evasive rolls in midair. The next second, a mechanical armor that didn't have time to evade was completely enveloped by countless explosive flames, and was easily torn into countless crashing metal fragments. Jarvis, have the Iron Legion counterattack immediately. Where did a group of mindless zombies get anti-air firepower? Tony shouted at Jarvis while manipulating the Iron Man armor to dodge nimbly. Sir, didn't you read the intelligence data shared by Mr. David before you left? Mr. Rourke judged that Chaos Astartes called Death Guard have appeared here. In a flash of lightning, Tony, who had just reacted, also noticed a dozen huge metal giants wearing green power armor. Except that the position of their abdomen was more swollen and huge, and their whole body was covered with signs of decay or damage. Chi. Tony, whose expression gradually became serious, instantly brought the Iron Man armor to a standstill in midair. He suddenly spread his mechanical arms. One by one, miniature missiles, only the size of fingers, were continuously launched from the back of the Iron Man armor. At the same time, the Iron Legion, successfully taken over by Jarvis, also launched a terrifying aerial assault on the Death Guard above the ground without hesitation. Rumble, accompanied by countless rotting flesh of Nurgle corpses scattered and flying, more than 30 Iron Legion armors of varying sizes crashed to the ground. Without hesitation, they waved their steel limbs, and launched an almost crazy charge attack towards the equally quick reacting Death Guard. Boom boom boom. While the miniature missiles launched by Tony were carrying out a covering bombardment, countless kinetic energy terror explosive bullets also continuously bombarded the frontal positions of the Iron Legion armors. But when these mechanical shell fragments without real operators inside were flying around, their forward speed did not decrease in any way. Instead, they forcibly collided heavily with the Death Guard who had just picked up their power scythes. However, Tony and the Iron Legion's crazy offensive did not achieve much success. Even if one steel limb completely penetrated the ceramite power armor, and even casually tore out the rotten internal organs of the Death Guard, these huge metal giants, who occasionally let out low chuckles, seemed to have not suffered any damage. Instead, they easily chopped at the Iron Legion armor with the power scythes waved back and forth in their palms. Damn it, why didn't I install power weapons on the Iron Legion? Jarvis, you control the Iron Legion to fire shock beams. Those armors on the verge of destruction directly overload the reactors, give these green fat pigs a big surprise. Tony, with a solemn expression, stared at the Iron Legion, which was suffering heavy losses, and subconsciously gritted his teeth. In just a few minutes, those Death Guard who had not suffered much damage seemed to have adapted to the fighting style with the Iron Legion. Every time they wielded their power scythes, an Iron Man armor that did not have time to dodge was quickly chopped into broken parts. Rumble. The next second, only less than 7 Iron Man armors successfully activated the shock beams located on their chest. The terrifying energy that gradually gathered finally cut off several Death Guard who wanted to rely on their own recovery ability and power armor to withstand the damage at the waist, and then evaporated them completely. However, before Tony, who was in midair, could show much of a smile, a larger number of Death Guard holding power scythes slowly walked out of the shadows of the buildings. Rumble rumble, accompanied by bursts of extremely dazzling energy light. One by one, completely destroyed Iron Legion armors had their arc reactors successfully detonated. The terrifying burst of energy and shockwaves instantly engulfed a dozen or so Death Guards within the blast radius. It also cleared out many Nurgle zombies that had just gathered around. However, the towering figures of more Death Guards and the almost undiminished overall number of Nurgle zombies made Tony, whose gaze was fixed on the visor screen, couldn't help but take a deep breath. The number and combat ability of these rotten tin cans far exceeded his imagination. So, with an increasingly indifferent expression, Tony unhesitatingly controlled his Iron Man armor to ascend rapidly. Completely abandoning the remaining Iron Legion, reaching a height where the Chaos Astartes, bolters could no longer reach. Tony and Roche had known each other for so long, and he may not have learned much else. But he knew battlefield data analysis and judgment, as well as how to ensure survival, very well. In this situation, it was not the time for him, a superhero, to take the limelight. Chi. At this moment, the energy propulsion ports of the Iron Man armor suddenly spewed out streams of brilliant light. The powerful thrust quickly enveloped Tony, propelling him towards the outskirts of the city. And just after he left the airspace above this city covered in rotten flesh. Thump thump thump, accompanied by a series of heavy footsteps, and the respectful posture of a large number of death guards slowly kneeling on one knee. A large, pot-bellied figure wearing green Terminator power armor. A terrifying figure whose rotten, foul-smelling body seemed to be entwined with swarms of plague flies like dark clouds, slowly stepped out of a flesh-forging factory that was still in operation. Your last struggles as ignorant mortals, this realm shall ultimately belong to the grandfather, and I shall be crowned king. Dash 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 dash. Jarvis, transmit all the intelligence information and image data to David over there. You are also responsible for controlling the armor to find Roche and the others' location. I'll take the opportunity to rest for a while. By the way, how is the research and development progress of that armor deployment system we were working on? I think we might as well call it Veronica. It will also add some diversity to you artificial intelligences. Sigh, although I knew that Roche's Astartes underlings were very capable, I still underestimated these special units, especially after they became the bad guys. Jarvis, I think we need to update our technology and equipment as soon as possible. In the future, powered weapons and more powerful ranged weapons may be our standard equipment. I think Redditus will help us out, considering our familiarity with each other. We just need to be responsible for developing the specific uses of various weapons. I remember that we haven't returned Roche's Centurion heavy armor yet, have we? Don't return it yet, we'll talk about it when Roche remembers and comes to ask me for it himself. I want to update and replace all the Mark series armors. I want to make the next generation of armor a anti-Astartes armor, specifically targeting these metal cans. Soon after, Tony, who was still flying rapidly in midair, babbled non-stop to Jarvis. Perhaps the destruction of the Iron Legion and the combat capabilities of the Death Guard were indeed a significant mental stimulus for him. Before long, the Iron Man armor controlled by Jarvis quickly found the Taurus assault vehicle convoy that was constantly speeding along the potholed road. Tony, relieved, successfully reunited with Roche, Thor, and Professor Hulk, old friends. After Tony informed Roche of the specific situation in the capital city of Lucknow, Roche, slightly shaking his adamantium helmet, had already anticipated this. According to the manufacturing progress revealed in those flesh-forging factories that he destroyed, the Death Guard Legion has, at most, completed the formation of one company. And judging from the situation that Tony just scouted, the Chaos Astartes only have power armor and power weapons, and even the number of bolters is relatively small, not to mention various heavy firepower. Adhering to the battle concept of striking while the iron is hot. With those thoughts in mind, Roche immediately sent instructions to the Stormtrooper Company and the Defense Force Guard via the communication channel to accelerate their advance. Then, he had Tony send the coordinates of Lucknow to David's temporary command center, preparing to bombard the entire city. After all preparations were completed, the fully armed Roche and his team once again embarked on the road to the final battlefield. Boom boom boom. About an hour later, accompanied by a terrifying roar like a bolt from the blue, countless shells and rockets hastily streaked across the azure sky above, quickly launching a carpet-bombing support towards the direction of the capital city of Lucknow. However, in less than 10 minutes, this storm-like bombardment completely subsided. Roche, slightly frowning, exchanged a subconscious glance with Tony and the others beside him. He immediately contacted Iron Man David again. But he unexpectedly learned a piece of information. That is, the current situation is not because the official forces are not cooperating, but that the local mortal troops have already exhausted all the ammunition resources they can currently find. As for the arrival time of more ammunition transport, it will be at least 24 hours later. Moreover, the first batch of whirlwind missiles in Rorschach's team were basically distributed to the Stormtrooper Company and the Lamenter's Company. It will also take a lot of time to replenish the next batch. So, Rorschach's plan to reduce the team's battle losses by relying on large-scale bombardment tactics was completely bankrupt before it even started. As the saying goes, speed is of the essence in war. Rorschach naturally couldn't continue to wait. Everyone can only rely on the two Lamenter's companies and the superheroes as much as possible before the Homeland Defense Force and the Stormtrooper Company arrive with more heavy firepower to engage in a life-or-death fierce battle with the Death Guard Company. And when the speeding convoy was still 10 kilometers away from Lucknow, countless shadowy Nurgle zombies appeared in everyone's field of vision like a surging ocean. But whether it was Rorschach himself, or Tony, Thor, and the Hulk superheroes, or every Lamenter who gripped their melee weapons and bolters tightly, none of them showed any signs of fear. Boom boom boom, the engine roars of one Taurus assault vehicle after another gradually reached their limit, emitting an almost deafening terrifying sound. At this moment, Rorschach suddenly activated his adamantium power armor and quickly stood up. A heavy magnetic boot heavily stomped on the top of the assault vehicle's hood. He took a deep breath, and one hand suddenly raised the blood sickle with green light lingering in his palm. Rorschach shouted loudly in a nearly hoarse, low voice to the people who were stepping on the accelerator of the assault vehicle to the end. For humanity, for the Emperor, all charge. The short distance between the enemy and us vanished in an instant, accompanying the clear trajectories of the whirlwind missiles gradually ascending from the missile launchers installed on the vehicle frame. Countless rapidly rotating wheels of the assault vehicles also made intimate contact with the Nurgle zombie tide head-on. In an instant, countless rotten flesh and blood flew everywhere, and fragile, decaying bodies suffered broken bones and tendons. And the Astartes in the hundreds of Taurus assault vehicles also fiercely pulled the heavy triggers of the flamethrowers, spraying streams of high-temperature flames towards the Nurgle zombies that were constantly surging around. At this moment, the Lamenter's chapter, led by Rorschach and others, are trying to cross the Nurgle zombie tide, which is too numerous to count, launching an extremely difficult vehicle charge towards the edge of the city. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Just at this moment, Rorschach, who keenly noticed that the speed of the assault vehicle convoy was gradually slowing down, fiercely waved his vibranium palm. Tony, who possesses the ability to fly, and Thor, the god of thunder, unhesitatingly ascended into the air. In the next moment, Tony, wearing his Iron Man armor, spread his arms wide as he flew forward. The arc reactor located in the chest of the armor instantly bloomed with a beam of energy impact as thick as a bucket, and quickly swept across the Nurgle zombie tide, blocking the front of the charging convoy. And at the same time that countless Nurgle zombies were being evaporated, runes gradually emerged on the ceramite shell of the six-armed Iron Rider Terminator. Thor, wrapped in strands of lightning all over his body, let out an angry roar through his metal helmet, and he forcefully raised the lightning-trembling Mjolnir above his head. In the next second, accompanied by the thick dark clouds that quickly gathered over the azure sky, and the biting gale that appeared out of thin air, streams of winding lightning snakes that seemed to possess spirituality quickly condensed and formed, and then stretched out their dazzling bodies from inside the dark clouds to continuously scorch and carbonize the Nurgle zombies on the ground. Dong dong dong. Almost at the same time, without waiting for Rorschach, as the spearhead of the convoy, to issue another order, the Hulk professor, wearing only a pair of tattered shorts, jumped off a Taurus assault vehicle and charged straight into the interior of the Nurgle zombie tide. And judging from the fact that the opponent's huge size had once again expanded a lot, obviously, the main personality at this moment had once again switched back to the Savage Hulk, who possessed even stronger combat abilities. In the next second, the Hulk, who opened his bloody mouth and let out an angry roar, rushed to the front of the charging convoy like a speeding locomotive. By the time Tony, who was in midair, temporarily ended the energy impact due to the arc reactor overheating, even Thor, who was constantly summoning lightning, needed to briefly recover his strength. The grimacing Hulk charged forward while frantically clapping his two huge green palms. In an instant, countless Nurgle zombies were completely shaken into puffs of blood mist and scattered, fragmented rotten flesh by the successive shock waves. And it was this tacit alternating attack of everyone also allowed this assault vehicle convoy carrying the Lamenters to successfully approach the edge of the city. Boom boom boom. Just at this moment, accompanied by the low roar that suddenly resounded around, explosive rounds that suddenly burst open continuously bloomed on Rock's vibranium power armor. Immediately afterwards, death guards with bulging bellies swayed their huge bodies and quickly appeared in the deepest part of the Nurgle zombie tide. They unhesitatingly unleashed a concentrated fire towards Rorschach, who was clearly more like the leader of the team. Humph! At this moment, Rorschach, who was not moved at all, faintly let out a cold snort inside his vibranium helmet. He quickly raised his two thick arms covered in vibranium armor. Metal 10 rings, filled with purple energy, were quickly shot into the air. After rapidly drawing a few trajectories, they fiercely strangled towards the direction of the death guards. Immediately afterwards, Rorschach himself, holding the scythe of blood, jumped out of the still unstable assault vehicle. While waving the scythe of blood in his palm back and forth, clearing the Nurgle zombies that surged up like a tide, he quickly strode his two magnetic boots and launched a charge towards those death guards who revealed their tall figures. At the same time, the Lamenters, who were rapidly maneuvering the assault vehicles to try to encircle them, also jumped off the vehicles one by one. Some of them held bolters and specifically sniped at the death guards further away. The other part desperately waved their melee weapons, constantly hacking at the Nurgle zombies, trying to disperse the entire battle formation, striving for more offensive opportunities for the battle brothers behind them. Close black lens bracket. Ding ding ding. In the next moment, under Rock's control, the metal 10 rings, which gradually formed a metal storm, completely enveloped the death guards who did not have time to dodge. And at the fastest speed, the opponent was completely worn down into scattered armor fragments and viscous flesh. Immediately afterwards, as the distance of Rock's charge continued to shorten, a dozen death guards wielding power scythes suddenly rushed out of their hidden locations. They smiled and quickly surrounded Rock's location. At this moment, Rorschach, driving the vibranium power armor, had no fear of this. He slightly lowered his spine, and the heavy steps under his feet fiercely accelerated the speed of his movement. The whole person used shadow step and forcibly broke into the attack range of a dozen death guards. Chi chi chi, and accompanied by the lightning-fast super grand rotation of the scythe of blood with green light lingering in Rock's palm. Almost all of the death guards were quickly divided into two from the waist. The entire upper body also immediately fell heavily towards the nearby ground. The quick-reacting Rorschach took out the heart of the forge from his waist and continuously pulled the trigger. Terrifying plasma spheres, almost forming an energy tide, completely submerged the surrounding death guards, and completely cut off their combat method of healing their injuries once again. Buzz buzz buzz. However, at this time, Rorschach, who had just taken a deep breath, in his eyepiece, he suddenly saw swarms of plague flies like dark clouds rushing over the heads of countless Nurgle zombies, quickly attacking towards his location. Plague fly swarm. It is Typhus, the host of the destroyer hive, who has descended. Exclamation mark quote. Rorschach, whose thoughts were turning quickly, drove the vibranium power armor backwards without hesitation. At the same time, the heart of the forge, which he held tightly in his palm, once again pulled the trigger. Dong dong dong. At this moment, a figure wearing green Terminator power armor with a bulging abdomen, a terrifying figure, whose size was even more burly and stronger than the Hulk, charged towards Rock's side like a speeding putrid train. Heh heh, prepare to die. In the next second, a huge power scythe wrapped in strands of destroyer fly swarm rapidly cut towards Rock's neck. One after another, metallic 10 rings, whistling through the air, violently slashed through the fragile bodies of countless Nurgle zombies. In an instant, they returned to the side of Luo Sha's vibranium-powered armor, and quickly rotated around him, completely forming an airtight spiral storm barrier. Ding ding ding, accompanied by incredibly intense collision sounds. Even though Typhus now tightly gripped a demon scythe infused with a large amount of chaos energy, compared to the ancient 10 rings with a more mysterious origin and material, it was clearly weaker by more than a little. Moreover, Luo Sha himself had experimented before. It's difficult to completely destroy the vibranium-powered armor with the destructive power of ordinary powered weapons alone. Even slightly stronger demon weapons would probably have difficulty leaving many marks. At this moment, Luo Sha, whose cold gaze was fixed on Typhus through the visor, took a deep breath. Fully focused, he forcefully drove the vibranium-powered armor forward. At the same time, he subconsciously put away the furnace heart. Instead, he used both hands to tightly grip the green light-entwined blood scythe. Ka ka ka. Immediately afterward, the spiral storm barrier formed by the rotating metallic 10 rings with purple light rapidly dissipated. and gradually formed a round purple halo above the power pack of the vibranium-powered armor, like a manifesting deity. And accompanied by one deafeningly loud collision sound after another. Typhus and Luo Sha, with no desire for verbal communication, continuously and fiercely collided their close combat weapons in their palms at a speed that was difficult to discern with the naked eye. The open area formed by the fierce battle between the two rapidly spread outwards. Any Nurgle zombie hordes or death guards who were unfortunate enough to be caught in the aftermath of the battle, or who did not have time to dodge, were all completely chopped into scattered pieces of flesh and blood by the two terrifying power scythes without any pity. Chi chi chi. Just at this moment, accompanied by the violent collapse of countless decaying ceramite armor pieces, Luo Sha, who quickly seized a small opportunity, forcefully embedded the blood scythe in his palm deep into the scapula of Typhus's massive body. However, before Luo Sha could forcefully drag the close combat weapon, Typhus, whose wound was spraying green, foul-smelling liquid outwards, suddenly sneered. The wound that healed in the blink of an eye actually completely enveloped most of the blood scythe in his body. In the next second, the demon scythe that had been tightly gripped in his palm also carried wisps of destructive plague that burst out from the fly nest behind him, and quickly chopped down towards Luo Sha's neck again. In the blink of an eye, the metallic 10 rings originally suspended above Luo Sha's power pack rapidly rotated again. And the demon scythe that had been constantly enduring the slashing of the blood scythe also seemed to have reached some kind of limit. Ding ding ding. It was actually forcefully cut into pieces of constantly flying metal by the continuously impacting metallic 10 rings. Even those destroyer plagues that were about to face Luo Sha were forcefully poured back into Typhus's massive body by the gale stirred up by the metallic 10 rings. At this moment, the fierce attack of both sides, who had not yet determined a victor, seemed to be coming to an end with the confinement and destruction of the close combat weapons. Unfortunately, for Luo Sha, whose killing intent was constantly surging in his heart, and Typhus, who longed for the glory of ascension to demonhood, this was just another battle horn that had just been blown. In the next moment, Luo Sha, who suddenly released the blood scythe with both hands, forcefully drove the vibranium-powered armor forward. A vibranium iron fist, quickly clenched into a fist, slammed into the front of Typhus's metal helmet with an unparalleled fierce force. When the visor fragments flew, it also made the other party's massive rotten body couldn't help but retreat backwards. Close black lens bracket, rumble. Almost at the same time, Typhus, who was falling backward, seized the opportunity to raise a heavy magnetic boot and forcefully kicked it between Luo Sha's chest and abdomen armor. This pure powerful force also made Luo Sha take a few steps backward, temporarily losing the opportunity to launch another attack. However, at this time, footsteps continuously moved forward. Luo Sha, who redisplayed the shadow step, quickly fell to Typhus's side like a wisp of dark shadow. Taking advantage of the fact that the other party was still constantly adjusting his body posture, two vibranium iron fists, reclenched into fists, had already slammed heavily onto the other party's rotten body like a storm. Dong dong dong. Just between Luo Sha, whose anger was constantly surging, and Typhus, who was immortal and unyielding, after falling into this most primitive fighting method. Whether it was Tony in midair, constantly firing impact beams, or Thor, whose six-armed Iron Rider Terminator armor was entangled with wisps of lightning. Or the Hulk, who was relying on unparalleled terrifying flesh and powerful strength, charging back and forth between the buildings on the ground, lifting countless Nurgle zombies and even death guards. They unexpectedly and simultaneously turned the direction of their attack and launched a converging charge towards the two tall figures who were brawling wildly. Zzz. At this moment, Typhus, whose green ceramite shell of the Terminator armor was already on the verge of shattering, was once again slammed on the metal helmet, which was about to be destroyed, by one of Luo Sha's vibranium iron fists. Kacha. After the other party casually took off the metal helmet with the distorted and deformed visor, he completely revealed an ugly and rotten face that was difficult to describe in words. Typhus, grinning coldly, relied on his own terrifying recovery ability that was comparable to instantly being full of blood. He quickly opened his thick arms towards Luo Sha, who was close at hand, and launched a terrifying grabbing action. Buzz buzz buzz. However, at this time, a brilliant energy impact beam from the arc reactor in the chest of the Iron Man armor unexpectedly interrupted Typhus's attacking posture, and successfully completely penetrated a terrifying hollow wound the size of a bucket on the side of the other party's chest and abdomen armor. Rumble rumble. Immediately afterward, accompanied by bursts of deafening muffled thunder. 4. Whose whole body was entangled with wisps of lightning, also summoned terrifying lightning bolts falling from the sky, and wielded the Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor, to pour a large amount of lightning power onto Typhus's massive body. Pili Pala, and only a few seconds apart, a terrifying figure whose whole body muscles were constantly expanding and whose skin color was becoming more and more green, was also like a flesh and blood train accelerating to the extreme state. Launched an irresistible fearless charge from not far away towards the location where Typhus was. In the next second, a green fist with thick knuckles, wrapped in wisps of piercing whistling that cut through the air, violently slammed towards Typhus, who couldn't help but kneel on one knee. In the blink of an eye, Luo Sha, who quickly drove the vibranium-powered armor to display the shadow step, suddenly appeared in front of Typhus. He stretched out 2 vibranium palms. 10 fingers forcefully clenched the blood scythe that was still embedded in Typhus's body. Rumble, with the Hulk's angry punch, which was completely powered by flesh and blood plus the speed of the charge, almost exerted all his strength. Typhus violently flew out into midair, having not yet fully recovered from the many injuries. And the blood scythe, which was tightly grasped in Luo Sha's palm, directly divided the other party's massive rotten body into 2 from the position of the scapula. Pu Kai, in an instant, green viscous juice, like a stink bug bursting its slurry, constantly scattered down from Typhus's incomplete body, as if a terrifying green blood rain was falling. Dong, after the rotten body, which was completely divided into left and right halves, heavily landed on the ground. Typhus, who was constantly spewing wisps of destructive fly swarms from his mouth, still failed to fall into death. He even let out an angry roar full of unwillingness and resentment from the depths of his throat. The Corpse Emperor's lackey, Dong Dong Dong. At this moment, Luo Sha, who casually carried the blood scythe on his vibranium shoulder armor, slowly drove the powered armor forward. He slightly lowered the vibranium helmet. His cold gaze stared at Typhus's ugly head and face through the visor, and said in a low voice, "No matter how hard the maggots in the cesspool try, they will not become butterflies that flap their wings and fly. Just like you sell your soul and desperately become Nurgle's most beloved Chaos Chosen, you will never be as weighty as my Primarch brother in Nurgle's palm. I send greetings to you from the Emperor, traitors of the Death Guard." "Ah, it's actually you, Fu Kai." In the next second, Typhus, who had completely fallen into a berserk state because of Luo Sha's heart-wrenching remarks, did not even have time to utter a complete roar, and his entire head was crushed by a heavy magnetic boot that was suddenly raised. First Captain of the Death Guard, Nurgle's Chosen, Mortarian's filial son, Lord of the Destroyer Hive, Typhus temporarily falls. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. High Heaven, Nurgle's Garden. A putrid swamp heavily enveloped by countless green mists and swollen fungi entwined with swarms of flies, or ever-blooming twisted flowers. Large flesh pods, shaped like bean pods, were constantly bursting outwards. Subsequently, many death guards clad in power armor, their abdomens swollen and rotten, fell out of the wriggling internal space. However, after almost all of the large flesh pods had burst open, approximately 2/3 of the death guards, from the moment they fell into the putrid swamp, never made another sound. Unaware, they allowed their decaying bodies to be gradually devoured by Nurgle's garden. Only 1/3 of a company remains, barely enough to resist the soul consumption caused by the descent. "Father Nurgle, we have failed." At this moment, Typhus the Traveler, having just slid heavily out of a large flesh pod, he unhesitatingly drove his Terminator power armor, smeared with rotten mucus. Kneeling on one knee towards the depths of the garden, he slowly lowered his head, brewing with arrogance and conspiracy. The next moment, accompanied by a low rumble like the turning of stars. All the vegetation, flowers, and even the thick green mist floating back and forth in the air around these death guards seemed to instantly gain life, constantly emitting rustling praises and prayers. Immediately afterwards, a large, broad back, like a continuous mountain range, whose size could not be easily measured with the naked eye, clearly appeared in the field of vision that Typhus and the others had just raised. The pockmarked skin of the other party seemed to be covered with wobbly, disgusting pustules. And around the disgusting pustules, countless Nurglings were almost swarming, squatting on them. They sometimes swam back and forth in some ripe, festering pustule pits, and sometimes climbed up and down along the broad back like a continuous mountain range. And with another low rumble that resounded throughout the garden, Typhus, kneeling on one knee, subconsciously shook his metal helmet, and he chuckled in a gloomy tone. You are right, our progress in exploring the new world is far ahead of the other gods. Moreover, I have something important to report to you. If I am not mistaken, my wisp of soul consciousness has not completely dissipated due to the death of the unfamiliar shell, but it has not successfully returned to the high heaven either, but due to various unexpected factors, it has been temporarily left in a special dimension. Perhaps a wisp of soul consciousness is too fragile to do anything, but it may also guide many things to happen quietly. Heh. At this moment, hearing what Typhus had just said, the terrifying existence that only revealed its broad back seemed to be completely happy. And as the other party gradually emitted a low laugh, countless nurglings fell heavily from the pockmarked, rotten skin like skin debris, constantly emitting laughter and wailing like a baby's cry. All things decay, all beings are immortal. At this moment, the remaining death guards, including Typhus the Traveler, they unhesitatingly lowered their heads again towards the terrifying existence's huge back. All things decay, all beings are immortal. Dash 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 dash. Typhus, as a company commander, was beheaded by Rourke and the others in succession. But this does not mean the end of the war. On the contrary, it is only the beginning of the second stage. At this moment, although the death guards scattered everywhere on the battlefield are not really that many, but with the strong cooperation of countless Nurgle zombies and many plague marines, it also caused no small trouble to the Lamenter's company who were fighting hard. At least by the time Rourke heavily crushed Typhus's head, 13 unlucky Lamenter's battle brothers had paid the price with their lives. In fact, this does not mean that the Lamenter's combat effectiveness is weaker than that of the Death Guard, but because the Lamenters, who were originally better at rapid mobile tactics, had to maintain a positional war, forcibly attracting the attention of more Nurgle zombies and Death Guards, to buy time for Rourke and others to behead the enemy. And as the heroes and Rourke completely completed the combat objective, the Lamenter's combat pressure facing countless Chaos Demons was immediately reduced a lot. The next moment, Rourke, who reactivated his vibranium power armor, was like a frantically rotating meat grinder, constantly rampaging back and forth in the endless Nurgle zombie tide. Those ordinary Death Guards could not even fight him. Usually, they would be completely torn into scattered pieces of flesh and blood by the Blood Scythe or the Metal 10 ring with just one encounter. After the last Death Guard holding a power scythe was torn apart by Rourke and the Green Giant Hulk together, Rourke, who quickly raised his vibranium helmet and glanced at the battlefield situation, planned to use the Tien Lin divine power he controlled to summon the Tien Lin divine beast to clear the field. Otherwise, with only these few high-level combat forces and the Astartes of the two Lamenters' companies, it is indeed difficult to completely clean up the Nurgle zombies in the entire city without a lot of heavy firepower support. However, just as Rourke subconsciously raised a vibranium palm, wanting to brew his emotions as soon as possible and start the summoning ceremony, Chi, accompanied by clear trajectories across the azure sky, countless whirlwind missiles, wrapped in ear-piercing screams, launched a blanket of fire bombing towards the densely packed Nurgle zombie tide between the ground. At this moment, Rourke, wearing a vibranium helmet, was slightly stunned at first. Immediately afterwards, the extremely old mechanical voice of the Servo Skull Redditus quickly came from his ears. Honorable Primarch, the Intelligent Control Legion has arrived on the battlefield, and I have personally come to provide you with support. The next second, communication information from Company Commander Gao Chi and others of the Stormtroopers Company also quickly arrived. Primarch, all members of the Stormtroopers Company are present and will launch a large-scale fire bombing into the city. Please hold on with your other comrades. The Latvarian National Defense Force Guards, the 1st and 2nd Armored Infantry Regiments are approaching the edge of the battlefield. Please issue the attack order, Commander. Thunderhawk transport aircraft flight formation arrives over the city, requesting permission for dive bombing. Immediately afterwards, several communication messages from the National Defense Force Guards and the Thunderhawk transport aircraft flight formation were successfully transmitted to Rourke's ears. At this moment, Rourke, wearing a vibranium helmet, subconsciously straightened his tall body wearing vibranium power armor. He took a deep breath and suppressed the many emotions that surged up. Speaking in a tone as calm as possible, he said in a deep voice to the communication channel, Listen to my orders, for humanity, all troops attack. Soon after, the first to collide head-on with the countless Nurgle zombie tides was the mind-controlled Legion. A large number of Hellbrute-like machine guards wielding chainswords with their mechanical tentacles charged to the front with their incomparably hard metal bodies. In an instant, the broken limbs and severed arms of many Nurgle walkers scattered all over the ground like rain and snow. Immediately afterward, the fortress-type mind-controlled machine soldiers, moving with heavy steps and gradually forming a line, quickly straightened their massive metal bodies. Red laser beams as thick as buckets, like unstoppable torrents of terror, completely penetrated most of the Nurgle zombie tide. Almost every shot completely evaporated tens of thousands of Nurgle walkers. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, accompanied by another whistling sound that cut through the air. Whirlwind missiles were launched from within the Stormtrooper company. They unleashed a covering barrage on the deeper parts of the Nurgle zombie tide. Subsequently, in the seats of one Taurus assault vehicle after another, a large number of stormtroopers raised the bolters in their palms and began to continuously charge towards the Nurgle zombie tide, following the entire mind-controlled Legion. And right behind the stormtrooper company, countless Imperial Guard regiments, cooperating with Rhino transport vehicles. Slowly advancing forward, they also raised the lasguns in their palms. Laser beams, like a torrential downpour, crossed most of the battlefield, constantly converging on the fragile bodies of the Nurgle walkers. Rumble rumble, and as time continued to pass, one lightning transport aircraft after another, having fully deployed for a low-altitude dive, relied on their own carrying capacity of turbo laser cannons and twin-linked heavy bolters to continuously plow through everything in the vast city, restricting and dividing the flow direction of the Nurgle zombie tide by destroying more buildings. Faced with such combat teams with such powerful offensive capabilities and firepower, the Nurgle zombie tide, almost without a command structure, was completely relying on its massive numbers to withstand any damage. Approximately 12 hours later, the Lamenter's company and Rorschach and others, originally located inside the city, had already gradually withdrawn from there. What followed was a remote bombardment that swept in again like a blizzard in the dark night sky. And several lightning transport aircraft carrying firestorm catalysts slowly approached the city's sky with the roar of engines. Soon after, almost everyone present had their faces illuminated by the terrifying flames that suddenly erupted in the city center. And countless Nurgle walkers hiding in the shadows of buildings or in explosion craters did not make any painful howls. When those terrifyingly hot blue flames quickly covered their bodies, a few strands of their remaining souls seemed to finally reveal a sense of relieved liberation. At this moment, the first plague war between the homeworld and chaos was finally coming to an end. However, it paid the price of hundreds of millions of lives. After the capital city of Lekanau was completely destroyed, Rorschach's troops did not leave immediately. Instead, they chose to use a carpet-like action to completely clean up the corners of the entire northern state. Even every inch of land was completely burned by flamethrowers, in order to minimize the possible existence of Nurgle's plague. However, Rorschach's radical approach was once again protested by the local official departments. It's just that perhaps due to the existence of countless combat teams, this kind of protest has always been maintained in paper form. They didn't even have the courage to find Rorschach and others for a face-to-face conversation. Dash 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 dash. The war that could physically eliminate the enemy is over. But more subsequent troubles began to follow. Now, the already notorious reputation of the Terra Astral Legion has once again become a hot topic of discussion around the world. Especially when a local official secretly revealed to the outside world, when the northern state, with a population of about 210 million, now has less than 5 million people left. Almost the entire world's online and real-world public opinion has completely boiled over. Everyone's thoughts are what exactly the official departments of various countries are doing, and why they would tolerate such a rampant terrorist organization to continue to exist. However, not long after, many real videos, with some mosaics and some sound trimming, were, accidentally, leaked. It also completely calmed down the people all over the world who had just been excited. Especially in the extremely clear first-person perspective. When those terrifying walkers, whose numbers cannot be simply counted in words, and the huge green metal giants appeared. No one who has watched the real video dares to say that they will not feel fear. And when more first-person perspective images of brave battles against these terrifying monsters, and ultimately heroic sacrifices, also quietly appeared. Many people's mentality has also undergone some subtle changes. The most obvious is in any popular topic discussing the Terra Astral Legion. Finally, some positive remarks of reflection or support appeared. This is undoubtedly something that I never dared to think about before. And when some online celebrities began to forward a memorandum from the American official internal, Mexican slum, incident in large quantities. The Terra Astral Legion's embarrassing reputation has faintly achieved a certain degree of reversal. Although Rorschach's team is still a terrorist organization in the official departments of various countries. But in the folk reputation, it has become an anti-hero organization with very radical methods. In fact, the series of real videos related to the Walker War in front. It was indeed Iron Man David who leaked it to the outside world under Rorschach's instruction. Rorschach didn't want to save the team's reputation, but he must let all native humans know. Today's world is never safe, and it is not immutable. However, the memorandum that accidentally caused the Terra Astral Legion's reputation to be subverted was not the work of Iron Man David. And the curious Iron Man David conducted a careful investigation. But I can only conclude that the source of this memorandum cannot be traced at all. Rorschach himself doesn't care about this. To some extent, countless ordinary people are kind, but they are also ignorant. As long as the guidance of public opinion changes slightly, perhaps the Terra Astral Legion, which has a good reputation today, is only a few reports away from completely becoming the second Hydra. So, he never cares about those virtual things, but puts his attention completely on reality. After all, there are more important things that need him to handle personally now. For example, the list of personnel casualties that Iron Man David has just counted is presented in front of him. The Lamenter's company, due to its isolated and in-depth confrontation with the Death Guard and the Nurgle zombie tide. The final number of deaths was locked at 25 Battle Brothers. The Stormtrooper Company did not suffer any losses. And the Imperial Guard Regiment, due to the damage to the biohazard suits. About one company of people was accidentally infected with the plague. Finally, after the medical staff used the panacea, there were still about 50 people who irreversibly became Nurgle walkers, and were subsequently executed on the spot by the stormtroopers. And the above-mentioned number of personnel and equipment losses. For Rorschach at the moment, it can be said to be negligible. As for the battle damage of the Lamenters, although he still felt heartache. But this is also the ultimate fate of the Astartes. For humanity and the Emperor, give your life. The temporary command center was densely packed with people. It was divided into several large areas by numerous isolated zones. Although the Nurgle Corps Tide and the Death Guard had been completely wiped out, it couldn't be guaranteed that some places didn't still harbor terrifying, mutated plagues that could cause even larger-scale disasters. At this moment, statues of the Emperor, personally sculpted by Iron Man David, were placed in the most prominent positions within each large area. Many local officials who originally didn't know what kind of deity the Emperor was would subconsciously pray and greet the statues, just for a sense of security. Not long ago, the Defense Force Guard from Latveria, after a long period of isolation and disinfection of weapons and equipment, had left the Northern Federation. However, the Stormtrooper Company, the Crying Company, and the Intellitronics Legion were temporarily stationed there. Doom and Iron Man David, as the public diplomatic personnel of the Terra Star Realm Legion, were engaged in a war of words with the local government and a team of investigators from the United Nations Security Council. Meanwhile, in the central area of the temporary command center, inside a metal prefab house, Roach, wearing vibranium-powered armor, was sitting face-to-face with Zheng Xian, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. On the table between them were several snacks and bottles of expensive, snow-white liquor. "Brother Roach, this is my personal collection of fine wine. I don't know if you're used to drinking it. I'll go first, please help yourself." At that moment, Zheng Xian, with a slightly flushed face, smiled. He quickly raised his glass, drained it in one gulp, and showed the inside of the glass to Roach. Roach, with a calm expression, was not polite. He casually picked up the glass, took a sip to feel the stimulation of the alcohol on his taste buds, and then tilted his head back and drank it down. "Director Zheng, this is the third time you've come to me for a drink. To be honest, with my current physique, the amount of high-concentration alcohol needed to get me drunk would probably have to be measured in tons. So, if there's something you want to say, you might as well say it first. If I can help, I won't refuse. Roach, gently playing with the glass with his vibranium hand, smiled slightly. He gazed at Director Jung in front of him and said softly. Haha, Brother Roach is still straightforward. Then I'll tell you the truth. Actually, this matter is not something I can control. It's a direct order from above. According to my idea, I would continue to get along with your organization. As the cooperative relationship between the two parties becomes closer, many things will be solved naturally. But unfortunately, this war against the plague zombies has made many people feel the crisis. While our shield has obtained more authority and resources, the burden on our shoulders has also become heavier. Therefore, for the safety of many agents, I want to borrow a technology from Brother Roach, a technology about the manufacturing of carapace armor. Zheng Xian, with an expression that gradually became serious, brewed his emotions and words slightly. He cautiously said to Roach, if you said you wanted the manufacturing technology of powered armor, I would refuse you without hesitation, because with Earth's current technological level, even if you were given it, it would be difficult to mass produce. Roach, squinting his eyes, smiled slightly. He refilled the glass with wine, gazed at Director Jung, and continued, I can give you the manufacturing technology of carapace armor, and even the manufacturing technology of a low-end laser gun. However, Roach's words did not make Director Jung smile. Instead, he widened his eyes, stared at Roach for a while, and then cautiously said, Brother Roach, do you really not know the value of these technologies? Or do you simply not care? Do you know how many things can be derived from just the manufacturing technology of carapace armor? This kind of high-strength metal material can replace many weapons and equipment. Even in the eyes of our researchers, it is a very extravagant practice to simply use it to manufacture personal protective equipment. Even the most low-end laser guns in your mouth, in the past, we could only produce them in low quantities, apply them on a small scale, and there were still many problems that could not be solved. Hearing Director Jung's slightly resentful words, Roach shook his head slightly. He gazed at the other party with a sincere expression and said, although I don't understand science, I also know the value of these things. On the one hand, it's because your shield and the forces behind it have indeed contributed a lot in this war. Without your existence and endorsement, the conflict between us and the local government would be unavoidable. Although it's impossible for us to lose, prolonging the war would bring more uncertainty, thereby leading to more serious situations. Also, the times are changing. Earth is not the Earth of the Terra Star Realm Legion, nor is it my Earth alone, but the only home of all of you. I can help you again and again. This is the responsibility I must bear as a Primarch. But what if I am held back by other battlefields? What if there is more than one similar battlefield? Can I be divided into countless bodies? Don't mention it, I really have an agent under my command who can transform into many clones. You're right, we really can't rely on just one person or one force. This is also one of the reasons why the higher-ups want me to acquire these technologies. With my current authority, I can guarantee to you on behalf of the higher-ups that if we face similar or even more difficult and terrifying wars again in the future, we will 100% stand on your side. Perhaps there will be some calculations and small thoughts between us, but the central idea is also for the safety of the entire Asia and even the Earth. As soon as Roach's voice fell, Director Jung, who smiled, subconsciously straightened his back. He solemnly extended a hand to Roach in front of him and made a bold promise. Roach stared deeply at the other party for a moment. He also extended a huge hand covered with a vibranium shell to the other party, reaching an important agreement that would satisfy both parties. Soon after, the summoned servo skull Redditus, driven by an anti-gravity engine, arrived beside the two people. Close black lens bracket. Roach folded his arms around his chest. He watched the one person and one skull exchange technological data as if they were bargaining, and couldn't help but shake his head. Using the manufacturing technology of carapace armor and the Hydra energy gun, they successfully exchanged for the hidden support of a huge industrial country, completely binding the two sides as comrades in a single front. This was undoubtedly something that would never be a loss. Pietro had always considered himself a strong person. He lost his parents at a young age and single-handedly raised his younger sister. Due to his intense hatred for Stark during his adolescence, he and his underage sister accidentally became test subjects for Hydra. While his sister's special abilities were somewhat unstable due to emotional fluctuations, she didn't suffer much when her powers were initially awakened. Pietro's path to becoming a speedster, however, was incredibly difficult. If the frail figure of his sister hadn't been etched in his near-death consciousness, he might not have survived. Now, Pietro seemed to be standing at the same crossroads of fate once again. He had the misfortune of being one of the dozens of members of the National Defense Army Guard infected with a terrifying plague. But at the same time, Pietro was also fortunate, because he was the only survivor among these comrades who hadn't yet turned into a Nurgle zombie. After experiencing agonizing and soul-wrenching suffering, the extremely weakened Pietro opened his eyes on the morning of the 13th day. Standing before him was a metal giant radiating an icy aura. Attached to the giant's waist was a chainsword stained with the scent of blood. Pietro already knew about these mortal warriors called stormtroopers. He had also personally witnessed the Astartes charging in and out of the Nurgle zombie hordes. Is it time? I understand. I know that this terrifying plague cannot be leaked in the slightest, because it is too deadly to humans. Please give my pension and medal to my sister. If there is enough time, I hope I can write a farewell letter. Pietro subconsciously licked his chapped lips. He slowly sat up and stared up at the stormtrooper so close to him. Pietro Maximoff. Just then, a turbid, low voice slowly echoed from the other party's metal helmet. Pietro paused slightly, then took a deep breath and nodded in response. Pietro, Corporal, Messenger of the 1st Armored Infantry Regiment of the Homeland Defense Forces. You are free, but before that, someone wants to see you. Wait, am I not going to be executed? Pietro's thoughts didn't seem to be able to process it for a moment. He stared blankly at the stormtrooper in front of him and couldn't help but ask. If you haven't turned into a zombie in 6 days, it means you've made it through. The reason for continuing to keep you locked up for so many days is firstly for safety, and secondly, you were temporarily forgotten when the Homeland Defense Forces withdrew. At this moment, Pietro subconsciously opened his mouth. But extremely complex emotions prevented him from saying much. In the end, he only squeezed out a dry question. Who exactly wants to see me? Of course, it's our Primarch. Remember, he doesn't like people kneeling at the drop of a hat. Show the spirit of a soldier and don't embarrass your Homeland Defense Forces. Dash 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 dash. Temporary Command Center. Rorschach, wearing vibranium power armor, put down the many documents in his palm. These were the legal rights that Doom and Iron Man David had worked hard to obtain from the Security Council investigation team. Including but not limited to, acknowledging the Terra Space Marine Legion as a legitimate international hero organization. At the same time, the wanted orders for terrorist organizations and other similar lenient clauses were revoked. Although Rorschach didn't intend to abide by any of the rules above. But since he could become a mudloach stirring up the fish pond and bring some different war vitality to the entire native world, he didn't care. Come in, you've been standing there for 10 minutes. How long are you planning to wait? Just then, Rorschach blinked his eyes and spoke to the outside of the room without looking up. As soon as he finished speaking, Pietro, with a tense face and full of tension, walked in stiffly. Homeland Defense Forces, first. He instantly straightened his back and performed an Aquila salute. He shouted loudly at Rorschach with an impassioned tone. All right, I know who you are. I heard your comrades in the regiment call you Quicksilver. Rorschach waved his hand to interrupt the other party's self-introduction and suddenly asked. Probably because I run fast and have white hair. Pietro raised his hand with a dazed look and scratched his slightly reflective light-colored short hair. Do you know why I'm looking for you? At this moment, Rorschach, with a few fingers propped on his cheek, narrowed his eyes and asked the other party again. Seeing Pietro shaking his head slightly, Rorschach took a deep breath and said in a calm tone, About a dozen hours ago, I suddenly sensed a familiar psychic fluctuation coming from the quarantine zone. Congratulations, Pietro, if this were another place, you would already be a living saint. Living saint, are you saying? Pietro, who was obviously more perceptive, instantly understood something. He carefully stared at the Primarch in front of him and asked subconsciously. Perhaps you have heard the legend of the Emperor. Even if you don't know it, it doesn't matter, because from now on, the Emperor will be an important thing that accompanies you throughout your life. Rorschach suddenly raised his other palm. He snapped his fingers crisply towards the outside of the room. The next second, a Lamenter's chaplain wearing black and white power armor stepped into the room with a large pile of heavy books and parchments. He is your extracurricular teacher. Your recent task is to be able to fluently recite the prayer scriptures and learn how to conduct effective prayers and sermons. Of course, I mean the original text, which means you need to relearn a new language. At the same time, your physical fitness and superpower characteristics will also be tested. The Forge will customize a power-assisted armor for you that can allow you to exert and even enhance your speed. How is your marksmanship? Oh, maybe you won't need a bolter anymore in the future, it's enough for your followers to have good marksmanship. At this moment, Pietro, with a dazed expression, heard Rorschach's series of words. He turned his head and looked at the tall Astartes who had been silent beside him. Even more nervous, he swallowed and asked, "Primarch, can you tell me what exactly is happening? Am I not going back to Latveria? What happened?" Simply put, the Emperor, who hasn't paid attention to me for a long time, has manifested again, but this time it's on you. You didn't really think that you could resist the terrifying plague spread by chaos with your willpower alone, did you? Moreover, this war has also made me realize that our team really can't be without a more stable channel of faith. After all, gods are real things. Pietro, whether you want or not, our team has decided that you are now the first pope of the native imperial cult. The imperial cult. In truth, it was something Loxia had always been unwilling to touch, for it was filled with irrational ignorance and uncontrollability. Perhaps this was one of the reasons why the emperor chose to eliminate religion in the first place. But sometimes, even Loxia, as a primarch, had to admit that the only spiritual weapon the Imperium of man possessed to combat chaos was the loyalty and faith in the emperor. And the emperor's reappearance also gave Loxia a chance to try. If he could foster a controllable and extremely loyal new imperial cult, then he would gain more effective countermeasures in the future wars against chaos. Of course, Loxia had to prevent the fanatical faith of the imperial cult from excessively interfering with and impacting other units in the team. Therefore, living saint, Pietro became a lone wolf pontiff who needed to independently develop devout believers. This was both a test and a bit of mischievousness in Loxia's heart. An enhanced human with superspeed powers becoming the pontiff of the imperial cult, probably few people could escape his preaching and evangelism, right? However, the more pragmatic Loxia, after learning Pietro's true identity, he immediately had Iron Man David retrieve more information on the National Defense Force Guard. Thus, he also unexpectedly learned that a wild alpha-level psyker had been existing under his nose for a long time. Now, barring any special circumstances, Pietro's younger sister, Wanda, was on a transport plane heading to the Gemini Island base. Doom would become her teacher, helping Wanda truly grow into a mainstay of the team. As time continued to pass, more and more units were gradually withdrawing from the Northern Federation. After the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. left first, Tony, who had been spending a long time with Redditus, wanted to return to Stark Tower as soon as possible to research his new armor. At the same time, he also planned to expand the subordinate personnel of the Inquisition. Otherwise, facing large-scale disasters breaking out in multiple locations, a mere few heroes would simply be too busy to handle it all. Thor wanted to return to Asgard. Firstly, to see the god King Odin and the Queen Mother, and secondly, he wanted to bring some of his little friends to Midgard. If the god King Odin allowed it, a permanent Asgardian legion stationed on Earth might also be a way to greatly increase the power of the Inquisition. Loxia had no objection to this. After all, facing an ancient existence like the god King Odin, if the Emperor didn't manifest, it was best for this little shrimp to quietly accumulate his own strength or the strength of the team. After Tony and Thor left one after another, Professor Hulk also transformed back into Dr. Banner in human form for the first time. He originally wanted to leave alone. However, with the sudden change of the Terra Astartes Legion from black to white, as well as Loxia's constant enticement and persuasion, Dr. Banner, after repeatedly pondering for a long time, decided to officially join Loxia's team. At least, he wanted to be able to obtain unlimited resource support for his experiments on gamma rays or the Hulk serum. This was simply an irresistible reason for Banner, who was poor and often evading capture. After finally becoming free, Loxia sat on the Thunderhawk transport plane returning to the Gemini Island base. Only then did he truly have time to check the latest situation of the simulator. With the end of this war, the sacred number on the Chaos God's sacrifice page once again began a slow countdown. Tisk tisk, the continuous chaos invasions will completely disrupt many development plans in the native world, perhaps I need to find a way to deceive the heavens. At this moment, Loxia, narrowing his eyes slightly, subconsciously muttered from his mouth. He vaguely had a good idea worth trying in his mind. A dozen hours later, Thunderhawk transport planes, fully loaded with stormtroopers and the Intelligent Control Legion, slowly landed. As soon as everyone stepped out of the cabin, Doom, with his dark green cloak slightly fluttering, drove his power armor and searched for his student, Wanda. In fact, Doom really didn't have much time to stay in the base at the moment, he had to retrieve that very important tesseract as soon as possible. And Loxia, driving the vibranium power armor, greeted Iron Man David. He also turned and walked towards the circular plaza deep in the base. After he quickly arrived at his destination, Loxia, once again opening the simulator page, sent more supplies in a secret letter to the Carcharodon's Astra chapter. In fact, Loxia's method of delaying the Chaos Sacred number was very simple. That was to minimize the time he stayed in the native world as much as possible. Instead, he would shift some of his attention to the Warhammer universe, and as long as he was within the territory of the Imperium of Man, the Chaos Sacred number would stop counting down. Next, he also planned to test whether the simulator could play an important role in simulating and prayer support in the Warhammer universe. At this moment, Loxia, frowning slightly, stood in place and waited for a while. He found that there was no movement on the circular plaza for the time being, and immediately turned and walked towards the upper part of the base. Since the next period of time would not be a prayer support that could be returned to after completion, Iron Man David had to stay in the native world to arrange subsequent development and many plans, and could not continue to fight alongside him. And with the current atmosphere and autonomy of the entire team, even without Loxia as the final decision-maker of orders, it would continue to develop according to the target tasks. A few minutes later, Loxia found Iron Man David in the base hall. He told the other party part of his plan, and ultimately obtained Iron Man David's understanding and support. Therefore, Loxia would arrive at the circular plaza almost every day in the following period of time, waiting for a response from the Carcharodon's Astra chapter. Buzz buzz buzz, not long after, accompanied by vibrations and humming from the air, a familiar spatial rift slowly appeared out of thin air in Loxia's field of vision. Immediately afterwards, a Carcharodon's Astartes wearing iron-gray power armor slowly stepped into the circular plaza. Carcharodon's Astra chapter, Librarian Yukari, greets the Primarch. Quickly kneeling on one knee, the other party unhesitatingly took off the metal helmet on his head. A pair of dark black eyes and shark teeth-like blades constantly revealed a kind of uncontrollable joy. How is your chapter, master? How is the situation of the Carcharodon's Astra chapter? Loxia, driving the vibranium power armor, stepped forward. He stared at the Carcharodon's librarian Yukari, who slowly stood up, and asked. Respected Primarch, the Carcharodon's Astra chapter is very good, even more prosperous than ever. The chapter master is also very good. We recently killed a Tyranid hive tyrant, repelled several tendril fleets of the Tyranid swarm. Did Tyberos tell you the specific situation on my side? Primarch, to be a permanent librarian in the Primarch's guard is my supreme honor as an Astartes. I will do my best to maintain the information transmission between us and will not delay anything for you. Human Empire Frontier, Ghoul Stars, Battle Barge, Water Wraith. Inside an ancient hall on the upper deck of the flagship, the light flickered, as if enduring some unusual interference. A group of librarians, led by Chief Librarian Pale Nomad T. Kahulanchi, were working intensively on complex preparations. They surrounded an even more ancient emperor statue in a ritual formation, each raising a massive hand heavily encased in ceramite. Accompanied by a sudden drop in air temperature and the condensation of snow-white frost on the metal floor, the librarian squad rapidly unleashed a surge of psychic energy. Buzzing. The next moment, a warp rift with jagged, tearing edges slowly appeared within everyone's field of vision. And a dozen Astartes, including Chapter Master Tyberos and Terminator bodyguards. They subconsciously raised their Antarctic bolter swords and two massive lightning claws in their gauntleted hands. Even though the Carcharodon's chapter now frequently enjoyed the special privilege of being personally watched by the Emperor. Sometimes strange warp entities would emerge from the warp rift. Although they didn't pose much of a problem for the Carcharodons, they were incredibly annoying. Thump thump thump. Soon after, with the muffled sound of magnetic boots heavily treading on the metal floor, Towering metal giants clad in black and white Terminator armor emerged one by one. And behind these Terminator squads, armed with storm bolters and jump packs, and carrying 2 chainswords and power swords on their backs. A tall figure wearing Oromite power armor, wielding the Blood Reaver and Frostfang in their hands, and with a slowly floating purple halo behind them, gradually revealed itself. At this moment, before Rorschach, who had just regained his attention, could greet Tyberos and the others. Chief Librarian Pale Nomad and his librarian brothers knelt on one knee in Rorschach's direction without hesitation, quickly offering their most loyal greetings. Welcome to the Carcharodons, Primarch. All right, no need for formalities among our own. Rorschach frowned slightly and shook his head, covered in short, gray-white hair, with a helpless expression. He took a deep breath of the cold air, slightly damp and with a salty, bloody scent, and waved to the kneeling Carcharodons. And Tyberos, still burly and tall, slowly stepped forward. He stared with a pair of dark eyes, trying his best to look down at Rorschach in front of him with a blunt tone devoid of offense. Primarch, would you like to rest first, or meet the other Void brothers? Chapter Master Tyberos, there's no rush. These 25 Terminators are battle brothers from the Lamenters chapter. They're temporarily acting as my Terminator bodyguard. Remember to arrange everything for them. Don't worry. To reduce the survival pressure on your chapter, we'll reimburse all the supplies consumed on this trip ourselves. Rorschach swayed his chin slightly. He tilted his head slightly and stared at Tyberos's familiar dead face and said faintly. Primarch, you jest. My Carcharodons chapter has just recovered a lot of Void supplies. Even without your continued support, the overall amount of supplies in the fleet has already entered a positive cycle, rather than the precarious days of the past. You don't need to worry about this at all. Tyberos parted his lips slightly. He slowly revealed his snow-white, sharp teeth and said to Rorschach in a deep voice. Rorschach first handed the Blood Reaver and Frostfang to several Terminator bodyguards beside him. Then he raised a Oromite hand and patted Tyberos's ceramite armor. At the same time, Rorschach also signaled that the Lamenters who had come with him could move freely on the battle barge. In fact, Rorschach had originally planned to come alone. But neither Iron Man David nor the Lamenters' company captains ever approved of him going to another chapter alone. So, Rorschach could only embark on the journey with a Terminator bodyguard composed of 25 Lamenters. Since it wasn't a prayer support mission with a time limit, Rorschach's mood was naturally not so tense, and he had plenty of time to kill. A dozen minutes later, the group traversed metal corridors. They successfully arrived at an ancient hall hung with various honorary trophies and broken weapons and armor. At this moment, Tyberos, as the chapter master, immediately gave up the metal throne in the center of the hall to the Primarch. And Rorschach didn't hesitate much. He slowly drove the Oromite power armor and sat on it, beginning to carefully listen to Tyberos's report. What Rorschach was most concerned about was naturally the 20 stormtroopers who had been sent to the Carcharodons chapter a long time ago. According to Chapter Master Tyberos, perhaps it was because they carried the Emperor's blood with them. Even when the fleet entered warp navigation, there weren't many obvious signs of chaos corruption. But even so, 9 people had died successively in the transformation surgery and new blood training program. Currently, only 8 stormtroopers who were able to survive and had already become Carcharodons Astartes. However, they are currently carrying out a material recovery mission, and will come to see Rorschach immediately after successfully returning. As for the specific development of the Carcharodons chapter, Tyberos also said without concealment. Thanks to Rorschach's very generous material support, the number of Astartes in the chapter has now expanded to 6 companies. At present, what limits the expansion of the Carcharodons chapter is not materials or power armor, but the number of gene seed. Although they don't mind using gene seed from other chapters at all. The Carcharodons still want to maintain the purity of the chapter's bloodline as much as possible. Even if they may suffer from the affliction of the blindness, they can still maintain the combat effectiveness of the entire chapter. Rorschach couldn't say much about this, and also believed that Tyberos's approach was not a problem. However, just as Rorschach and Tyberos were planning to continue their conversation, Chief Librarian Pale Nomad walked into the interior of the ancient hall with a blank expression. He first nodded and greeted Chapter Master Tyberos, and then fixed his dark eyes on Rorschach. Honorable Primarch, I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation with the chapter master, but I'm afraid that if things are allowed to continue to develop, there may be more serious bloodshed. Your Terminator bodyguard, just started fighting with the Carcharodon's Void Brothers. Inside the crab-shaped hull of the battle barge, Crying Suns clad in Terminator armor formed a tight defensive formation. They moved slowly but steadily, responding to the repeated attacks of dozens of Void Brothers from the Carcharodon's chapter. Of course, both sides tacitly refrained from using bolters or melee weapons, relying solely on heavy punches and kicks to beat each other. On the periphery of this chaotic conflict, ragged mortal servants and auxila known as thralls stood expressionlessly, watched by many veteran Astartes who were not participating. Thud, thud, thud. Just then, accompanied by the extremely heavy sound of magnetic boots, Rorschach, driving his vibranium power armor, and the massive Tyberos quickly appeared at the entrance of the hall. Immediately afterward, the two of them launched a charge in perfect synchronization, bursting into the center of the chaotic battlefield like erupting rockets. Whiz, whiz, whiz. The metal rings behind Rorschach's power pack moved at will. Each of the Crying Suns attacking in Terminator armor was pushed back into their defensive formation with incredible precision. At the same time, the Carcharodons who were launching a fierce assault on the Crying Suns' defensive formation were mercilessly thrown out, one in each hand, by Chapter Master Tyberos. In less than a minute, this sudden and intense conflict dissipated. At that moment, the ice-cold Rorschach focused his gaze on the Terminator squad. He asked the Crying Suns in a low voice, "Tell me, what exactly happened that required you to clash with your Void Brothers? If you can't give me a good reason, then none of you will ever return with me." At the same time, Tyberos, visibly enraged, grabbed a leading Carcharodon Astartes. He instinctively bared his sharp teeth, his deep voice sounding as if it came from the abyss. "It seems that the comfortable life these past few days has caused you Void Sons to lose your reverence for the chapter's regulations. If you cannot provide the Primarch with an explanation, I will execute the highest penalty on the spot, without any trial. Do you understand?" At this moment, with the successive interrogations of Tyberos and Rorschach, the Crying Suns Terminator squad and the dozens of Carcharodons who participated in the assault all knelt on one knee. Subsequently, everyone finally understood the true source of this conflict. It was the Carcharodons chapter's poor treatment of their mortal servants. This was completely unacceptable to the Crying Suns. Even before coming here, Rorschach had told the Crying Suns about the Carcharodons chapter's style of operation. But after the Crying Suns personally witnessed the miserable state of those clearly malnourished and ragged mortal servants, they couldn't help but mock the Carcharodons. Originally, this wouldn't have escalated into a fistfight between the two chapters. However, when a mortal auxila, no longer able to endure this miserable life, tried to approach the Crying Suns to beg for help, and was casually beaten into a severely injured state by several Carcharodons, the Crying Suns could no longer tolerate this situation happening before their eyes. Thus, a fierce conflict completely erupted between the two sides. Even though, in terms of individual combat power, the Carcharodons, who had countless kills, actually had an absolute advantage. The Crying Suns, clad in Terminator armor, leveled this gap with their superior equipment. In addition, both sides understood that they couldn't cause any deaths. So, before Tyberos and Rorschach arrived, this was more like a warm-up exercise between brother chapters. Chapter Master Tyberos, I understand the difficulties of the Carcharodon's chapter, and I have tried to rationalize all of your actions, but how do I remember that the previous Carcharodon's chapter didn't have such a low moral standard? You dare to arbitrarily abuse servants when I'm around. What have you been doing when I'm not? At this moment, Rorschach's icy gaze slowly shifted to Tyberos's massive body. He stared at him and said, word by word. Rorschach had long known that the Carcharodon's chapter's attitude towards mortal servants wasn't good. But when he first arrived at the Carcharodon's chapter, the Astartes' attitude towards mortals wasn't so bad. Primarch, the responsibility for this matter does indeed lie with us Carcharodons. The Battle Brothers of the Crying Suns chapter did nothing wrong. If we trace the roots, this actually stems from a rebellion launched by a mortal auxila attempting to unite mortal servants. At that time, our fleet was heavily besieged by the Tyrannid swarm, and there were some problems with the supply of resources. In order to maintain the combat power of the Astartes, we had to reduce the rations of the mortal auxila and servants. After enduring hunger for a long time, they finally lost their minds and tried to launch a rebellion that was doomed to fail. Since then, the Carcharodon's chapter's attitude towards mortals has become somewhat problematic, especially among the newly formed neophytes, which is undoubtedly a dereliction of duty on my part as chapter master, and I am willing to bear any punishment. Chapter Master Tiberos stared with his pair of dark eyes. He admitted all the mistakes to Lorsch without hesitation. Lorsch, with a slight frown, stared deeply at him for a moment. He then reached behind him and took out a bottle of panacea capsules from the bottom of his power pack, throwing it to the crying sons beside him. You go save people first. By the way, inspect all the mortal servants and auxilia throughout the entire fleet. I don't think the Carcharodon's chapter will have any objections. The indifferent Lorsch slowly retracted the metal rings that had been floating above his head, reforming a purple halo behind him. He scanned all the Carcharodons standing in the hall, took a deep breath, and said, "Perhaps Terra cannot understand your Carcharodon's great contribution to the Imperium and humanity, but I, as the Primarch, understand. Therefore, I will become your chapter's most steadfast supporter. I am not your void father, but as a gene sire, I also have a responsibility to lead you on the right path. You are the space sharks. You are valiant Astartes. You are also the Emperor's angels. You must always remember what you are fighting for. Are you fighting for the Imperium? Are you fighting for the Emperor? Or are you only fighting for the Void Father? No, you are fighting for countless mortals. Some say that the Astartes are the Emperor's blade, but I say that you are also the guardians of the entire human race." At this moment, Lorsch's deep voice echoed like thunder throughout the entire hall. Countless mortal servants and auxilia knelt on the ground with excited expressions, constantly praying and kowtowing in Lorsch's direction. In the next moment, almost all the Astartes of the Carcharodon's chapter also knelt on one knee, lowering their heads in the direction of the Primarch. We will always remember, for the Primarch, upon the metallic throne within the ancient hall, Rockard, propping his cheek with a hand of vibranium, gazed at the massive departing figure of Tiberius of the Scarlet Scars. He subconsciously emitted a fleeting sigh through his teeth, which echoed in the dimly lit air. Will the Soul Drinker's chapter, after listening to a dose of motivational encouragement, be better towards mortals? Perhaps, as it represents the preferences and inclinations of a Primarch. Moreover, Rockard controls the entire chapter's supply line. Even if the Soul Drinkers have to pinch their noses, they'll have to submit if they don't want to become poor sharks again. However, this once again exposes the unresolved issues within the Imperium of Man, or perhaps important matters that the Emperor didn't have time to complete. For example, how Astartes and mortals should interact. After all, there are very few Astartes chapters that place mortal lives above their own glory and lives, like the Lamenter's chapter. At this moment, Rockard, squinting his eyes, thought of this. Several familiar chapter names quickly flashed through his mind. The Salamanders, Ultramarines, and Blood Angels before the onset of the Thirst and the Black Rage, among others. These are all Astartes chapters that treat mortals relatively well. Subsequently, he slightly shook his head, his gray-white short hair standing on end. Thinking about these things now is meaningless. Even I, a Primarch, cannot easily oppose the ancient system and customary practices of the entire Imperium of Man. I should focus on myself first. Rockard muttered to himself as he took a deep breath. He straightened his back once more on the metallic throne. The slight collision between the vibranium power armor and the metal throne produced a crisp sound. Immediately afterward, Rockard unhesitatingly opened the simulator page. From it, he took out a palm-sized throne gelt, holding it between his fingers. Come on, let me see if there are any changes when simulating in a different universe. Emperor Protect. Ding. The next second, accompanied by Rockard forcefully flicking the throne gelt with his thumb and the incredibly crisp sound of the coin spinning. His entire tall body sat motionless within the metallic throne as if his soul had been instantly extracted. Open black lens bracket simulation starting, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket current available identities. Space Wolves 13th Grade Company Captain, Death World Fenris, Cypher Lord, Webway Comorig, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Please select an arrival identity first. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. If refused, a random arrival will occur. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Identity selection refused. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Simulation starting, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You are already in the Warhammer universe. A random arrival time and location will be selected. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Time, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Location, Tomb World Solemnes. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You have successfully arrived at an unknown location with a metallic ground that is experiencing violent tremors. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You open your tightly closed eyes with a slightly dazed expression. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You quickly sense the vibranium power armor you are wearing, as well as the blood scythe, which is entwined with green light, in your palm. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket at the same time, within your field of vision. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. A Necron, radiating a cold luster and with glowing green lights flickering in its eye sockets, subconsciously opens its metal-fused mouth. As a cryptek, it clearly notices you, who has just appeared out of thin air. Close black lens bracket. Huh, where did you crawl out from, you? Open black lens bracket. At this moment, the cryptek's cold gaze seems to quickly scan you. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. It then lowers its head to look through a thick catalog resting on its metal hand bones, but it can't find anything useful. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The next second, its cold gaze seems to notice the blood scythe you are holding tightly in your palm. Close black lens bracket. Wait, that scythe is. Open black lens bracket. However, at this moment, you, abruptly activating your vibranium power armor and stepping forward, casually cleave off the cryptek's metal head. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Clang. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. As the Necron's metal head rapidly flips and falls to the ground. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. An extremely penetrating sound, with even the melodious notes faintly mixed with endless sorrow, suddenly echoes throughout the entire unknown space. Close black lens bracket. The bell. You subconsciously frown. Open black lens bracket. You then turn your gaze, inadvertently seeing rows of stasis fields that are constantly collapsing and being destroyed, as well as a large number of terrifying Xenos trapped inside the fields for who knows how many years. Close black lens bracket. Hiss. I'm in big trouble. This seems to be Trazyn the Infinite's museum world. Open black lens bracket. You grimace as you stare at the nameless Xenos you've never seen before, which are gradually moving their eerie or twisted, terrifying limbs. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You take a deep breath, instinctively tightening your grip on the blood scythe in your palms. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Thump thump thump. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You unhesitatingly activate your vibranium power armor and charge into the horde of Xenos. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. It's not that you are the kind of extreme character who must exterminate every Xenos you see, but rather that these Xenos, who have been imprisoned for who knows how many years, have completely lost their basic rationality. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. If you want to safely escape this place, you must break a bloody path as soon as possible. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Chur chur chur. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The rapidly swung blood scythe cuts into the flesh of a large number of Xenos like a ring of green light. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Immediately afterward, you subconsciously release one of your vibranium hands and swing it forward with force. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The incomparably familiar metal 10 rings did not arrive as expected, causing you to instantly react. Close black lens bracket. Emperor, oh Emperor, you could have at least given me all my weapons and equipment. You can't help but complain loudly. Open black lens bracket. You can only continue to grip the blood scythe in your palm and engage in an even more intimate and friendly contact with these Xenos that are gradually regaining their vitality. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Bang. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Accompanied by a vibranium iron fist swung out with force. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. A Toleran, with a pair of insect-like transparent wings but a body shaped like a squid, is blasted away by the overwhelming force. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At the same time, you quickly activate your vibranium power armor and roll forward. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Relying on your incredibly keen animalistic senses, you successfully avoid a sneak attack from behind, a heavy blow from a lictor that is 3 meters tall and has 8 limbs. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The next second, before you can fully get up, you once again sweep the blood scythe. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Swarms of hormagaunts that have just leapt into the air are cleanly sliced into piles of scattered flesh and blood by the sharp blade. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Just as you are reactivating your vibranium power armor and charging forward, trying to carve a path to survival from the countless Xenos. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The corner of your eye inadvertently sees a hive tyrant that has just recovered from stasis, and several sloth that are constantly writhing all over their bodies turn their attention to you. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, you exhale helplessly. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. One of your hands quickly reaches back, abruptly taking out a melt-a-bomb from the bottom of your power pack. Close black lens bracket. Even after all these years, melt-a-bombs are still the most reliable. Thank you all for your support. A sudden inspiration, or rather, something that has been brewing for a long time. The two originally different story chapters, Night at the Museum and Fortune Phoenix, have been completely combined. Faced with tens of thousands of alien creatures from different races, different eras, and even with bizarre attack methods, you believe that even a fully armed Primarch might not be able to achieve final victory. For example, Gilliman, who is best at one-on-one combat. At this moment, you are completely prepared to perish together with some of the aliens. Anyway, you are already used to death. Rather than being torn apart and eaten by these damned aliens after exhausting your strength, or being parasitized half dead, it would be better to be cleanly blasted into ashes. However, just as you unhesitatingly activated the thermal detonator and were about to drive the vibranium power armor to launch a final charge, you suddenly heard a series of heavy footsteps gradually approaching from a metal passage not far away. Thump, thump, thump. In the next moment, a handsome man wearing ornate purple gold power armor with a ceramite shell and pure white hair fluttering in the wind, like a proud phoenix spreading its wings, stepped on the flesh and blood of countless aliens, landing heavily beside you with incredibly swift and agile steps. Brother, my first piece of advice to you is, never treat alien weapons as treasures. The other party, with a hint of bitterness on his lips, looked down at you, his purple eyes glancing at the blood scythe you were clutching in your palm. Fulgrim, you suddenly widened your eyes and blurted out subconsciously. This second piece of advice is, when the enemy is too strong to fight, perfect skill is your only lifeline. The incredibly handsome human man did not answer your question immediately. His expression turning cold, he quickly activated his ornate purple gold power armor and stepped forward. A power sword with a narrow blade and a shimmering, glass-like luster between the edges suddenly leapt from his waist into his ceramite hand. In an instant, the other party transformed into a purple-gold metal whirlwind, forcefully charging into the depths of the surging, terrifying aliens. As the power sword, gripped tightly in his palm, danced back and forth, slashing, the unknown aliens that pounced on him almost instantly lost their life force. But they didn't even touch a strand of the handsome man's pure white hair that fluttered in the wind. Then, after killing countless aliens in a short period of time, the other party finally faced the most troublesome sloth. And faced with the desperate siege of these sloth, the power sword in the handsome man's palm seemed to completely transform into a storm of starlight, each extremely sharp sword light piercing a disgusting, terrifying worm with unparalleled precision. At this moment, you saw that the hive tyrant, which was close at hand, had its attention successfully drawn by the handsome man in the metal passage and began to move its massive body towards the other party, launching a terrifying offensive. You took a deep breath and quickly activated your vibranium power armor to provide support to the unfamiliar Primarch. Chi, chi, chi. Accompanied by streaks of purple blood splattering on the metal floor, the blood scythe, which you desperately swung, continuously left terrifying, unhealable wounds on the hive tyrant's thick carapace. Soon after, the handsome man, who had successfully eliminated several sloth with a power sword, also joined the battle. Perhaps it was the other party's effortless offensive style and movements that immersed you in the process of enjoying the battle. The trajectory of the blood scythe, gripped tightly in your palm, became more and more exquisite and tricky, even inflicting more damage on the hive tyrant in a short period of time. Chi, chi, chi. Accompanied by the dull thud of the hive tyrant's massive head and a large number of terrifying limbs falling heavily to the ground, you actually, with the handsome man's careful assistance, completely killed the hive tyrant. Your comprehension of battle is indeed extremely amazing and perfect, not much different from mine. Although this hive tyrant's true combat power is already less than 10% of what it once was, it is still a glory worth enjoying to the fullest. The handsome man held the power sword in his backhand, his deep purple eyes staring deeply at you. Glory. Glory is useless. You, who had just woken up from a special state, took a deep breath and scolded the other party in a low voice without any politeness. It's a problem that could have been solved with a single thermal detonator, but instead, I had to expend even more precious stamina. Fulgrim, do you think this is really worth it? Heh, your remarks remind me of another brother. Come on, let's fight our way out first. The handsome man, who did not admit his identity as a Primarch, seemed to reveal a trace of reminiscence on his flawless, fair face. He didn't mind your sarcastic words at all, but instead extended an invitation to fight side by side with a calm expression. At this moment, you turned your head and stared at the countless alien creatures that were attracted back by the alien corpses and the smell of blood, and slowly shook your head full of gray-white short hair. Then let's kill. Even if we can't kill our way out, it's just dying in battle, what am I afraid of? As soon as the words fell, you quickly activated your vibranium power armor, wielding the blood scythe and charging towards the metal passage filled with a large number of aliens together with the Primarch Fulgrim beside you. It is unknown how long it had passed, but your vibranium power armor was covered with the flesh and blood remains of alien creatures, and even your gray-white short hair was stained dark red with blood. You finally rushed into a lifeless metal passage with Fulgrim. You first looked around left and right, and then carefully listened to the surrounding movements, before turning your head and saying to the Primarch, who still didn't have much blood on him, in a deep voice. Fortunately, those alien creatures have been locked up for too long. The long-term stasis field confinement has made them completely lose their minds in. However, at this moment, your words, which were still unfinished, gradually stopped as your gaze was focused on the Primarch. You couldn't help but let out a fleeting sigh. You are not that traitor Primarch who couldn't even be human, or rather, you should be a clone accidentally created by Fabius Bile, right? You asked. Fulgrim, with a very solemn expression, his face also showing a playful expression. I am a flower in the mirror, or a reflection of the moon in the water. Brother, is it really that important whether I am that guy? The only thing I want to do is, after escaping this damn place, to personally ask him, how can a brother-killing traitor face the father's disappointment and the chaos of the Imperium, and how can he be worthy of the noble glory of the Emperor's Phoenix? This, Fulgrim, who still maintained his loyalty, roared at you in a low voice with a firm and powerful tone. You fell silent. You never imagined that the loyal will of a Primarch clone would be more resilient and powerful than that of a true gene sire, a truly great irony. You blinked. You suddenly raised a vibranium palm and slowly extended it towards Fulgrim. While I don't think you can face a demon Primarch alone, I admire your fighting spirit, brother. Fulgrim, still in a state of emotional flux, was taken aback. Then, with a smile, he extended a massive hand towards you, its ceramite shell interwoven with purple and gold. Soon after, the cacophony of countless aliens once again echoed around you. You instinctively tightened your grip on the blood scythe, turning your head to look at Fulgrim beside you. Fulgrim, you've been here for so long, do you have any clues? Like a direction or route to escape this place? Brother, while I'd love to tell you that I have everything under control, I only just escaped the stasis field's confinement. Based on my careful observations along the way, the entire unknown space is vast, and it will be difficult for just the two of us to escape the maze-like passageways. Fulgrim frowned slightly, his face seemingly glowing against the backdrop of pure white hair. You took a deep breath, shifting your gaze towards a metal passage. Then let's get moving. Before the true master of this place arrives, let's try to find comrades who can escape with us. If there are enough of us, we might even be able to give the enemy a huge surprise. You immediately propelled your blood-stained vibranium power armor forward without hesitation. Fulgrim slightly raised his chin. He stared at the dark, cold metal dome above, like a night sky, and couldn't help but tighten his grip on the power sword in his palm. The two of you began exploring the extremely complex routes of the metal passages. Using your incredibly keen animal senses and sense of smell, you moved away from the edges of the alien scavenging area. Soon after, in a small plaza connected by a metal passage, you unexpectedly encountered a group of Necrons gathering their forces. As soon as the two sides met, you and Fulgrim quickly launched a charge and attack. A group of Necrons, commanded only by Canoptech technicians, faced with a Primarch clone whose combat power had not diminished much, and a small Primarch who was also a formidable fighter, had no chance of turning the tide. A dozen minutes later, you, driving your vibranium power armor, knelt on one knee and picked up an extremely thick metal directory from beside the shattered metal body of the Canoptech technician. Brother, be careful of the aliens' things. In response to Fulgrim's reminder, you said without turning your head. I can't guarantee anything about other aliens, but as long as you're careful with Necron weapons and equipment that you haven't seen before, there shouldn't be any problems. Wait, I might have found our current location. You successfully found a partial map of the alien scavenging area on the green light flashing metal directory. Although you and Fulgrim didn't recognize the Necron's writing, you could still understand the diagrams. So, the two of you slightly adjusted your weapons and immediately changed direction, running forward according to the map's guidance. As time passed, you gradually left the maze-like metal passages and entered a large area of more ancient palace complexes. Based on the overall appearance and structure of these palaces, Fulgrim judged that this should be the decorative style of the Eldar. You remained noncommittal, simply shaking your head slightly. Boom boom boom. Just then, you and Fulgrim suddenly exchanged glances. Because you clearly heard the booming and cracking sounds of bolters coming from your ears. Without any hesitation, the two of you quietly groped towards the location where the fierce battle was taking place. The next moment, in front of an ancient palace adorned with countless spirit bones, a stage belonging to an Eldar Harlequin troupe was constantly being performed. Accompanied by crystalline shuriken that traversed the air like a storm, a dozen incredibly agile Eldar Harlequins dodged the bolter fire while launching a dazzling and magnificent offensive towards the enemy. And opposite the Eldar Harlequins, 5 Chaos Astartes clad in black Terminator power armor advanced slowly and steadily towards the Eldar Harlequins like metal statues. Terminators of the Black Legion. You suddenly let out a sneer and muttered. Seeming to sense Fulgrim's slightly questioning gaze, you took a deep breath and began to explain to the other party. The Chaos Legion re-established by Abaddon, Horus's successor. These are a bunch of damn traitors. Since they are traitors, then they are not worth saving. Fulgrim stared at the two sides engaged in fierce battle with a look of disgust, and said in a low voice towards you. You nodded your head subconsciously, without any expression. However, at this moment, just as you and Fulgrim were about to quietly leave. Chiz chiz chiz. One after another, Eldar shuriken that pierced through the air suddenly shot towards the corner where you were hiding. At the same time, several Eldar Harlequins with dance-like steps quickly launched a surprise attack towards your location. How did they find us? Fulgrim subconsciously tightened his grip on the power sword, muttering to himself. You immediately drove the vibranium power armor to stand up, and clenched the bloodscythe in your palm. Who knows? Since they don't want to live, then let's send them on their way. You and Fulgrim rushed out of your hiding place one after another. In an instant, both Fulgrim's power sword and the bloodscythe in your palm were rapidly swung into terrifying storms that were difficult to resist. An Eldar Harlequin's power blade collided head-on with your bloodscythe. Without any hesitation, you changed your move. With a flip of the sharp blade, the green light-entwined bloodscythe had deeply pierced into the other party's body. And the Eldar Harlequins facing Fulgrim were even more miserable. In just one encounter, several heads wearing Harlequin masks had already soared into the sky, about to roll and fall to the ground. Break the illusion to find the truth. You must break the illusion to find the truth. Only then can you obtain final liberation. At this moment, the Eldar Harlequin, whose chest had been pierced by the bloodscythe, suddenly disregarded his injuries and tried his best to approach you. He said to you urgently in stiff imperial language. What did you say? You frowned slightly. However, the next second, this Eldar Harlequin in front of you seemed to exhale his last breath, completely losing any sound. Thank you for your support. The slender body of the Eldar Harlequin fell heavily to the ground. Absolutely absurd. Is there no one among you Eldar who can speak sense? You frowned, blinking your eyes as you focused your gaze on the more intense battlefield. With your and Fulgrim's appearance, the Eldar Harlequin seemed to fall into a flustered and awkward situation. On the contrary, the Black Legion Terminators, relying on their steady and methodical advance, gradually began to compress the Harlequins' space for survival. At this moment, neither you nor Fulgrim stepped forward to help. Whichever side survives, it would likely be the starting point for another battle. Soon after, as the roar of bolters and chainswords gradually ceased, 5 almost unscathed Chaos Astartes completely ended the life signs of the Eldar Harlequins. They slowly rotated their helmet lenses, focusing their gaze on you and Fulgrim. And you subconsciously tightened your grip on the bloodscythe in your palm, your icy gaze analyzing how to launch a more effective attack. Look what we have here, a Primarch and his little sidekick. The gods truly bless us. A Chaos Astartes, clearly in a leadership position, suddenly stepped forward, the bolter in his palm already aimed in your direction. You and Fulgrim exchanged a cold smile, your icy gazes as if looking at 5 dead men. In the next moment, you took the initiative, driving your Wraithbone power armor forward in a fierce charge. Boom boom boom. The bolters in the palms of the 5 Black Legion Terminators rapidly unleashed a large-scale barrage towards you. However, you merely raised a single Wraithbone arm to shield your unhelmeted head. The Wraithbone power armor, constantly sparking, crashed into the enemy formation like an indestructible iron fortress. Boom! With a deafening clang of metal, the leading Black Legion Terminator quickly staggered backward. The blood scythe, tightly gripped in your palm, also swept across the opponent's neck like a leech, carrying a heavy aura of green light. At the same time, Fulgrim, once again transformed into a purple-gold whirlwind, had completely rushed in front of the other Terminators. With elegant yet brutal movements, he raised a massive hand, instantly crushing the metal helmet of one Terminator, while the power sword in his other hand had already deeply pierced into the thick armor of a Terminator beside him. In the next moment, having successfully cleaved off a rolling head, you also drove your Wraithbone power armor, moving your heavy steps, once again colliding violently with the other Terminators. Roar! At this moment, the Terminator whose helmet had been crushed by Fulgrim let out a miserable roar, and the blood scythe in your palm also spun, deflecting 2 roaring chainswords, and once again cleaving into a Terminator's shoulder blade. Within a short period of time, one Terminator lost his entire head, and another Terminator had his head crushed by terrifying force. And another Terminator, whose chest armor had been pierced by Fulgrim's power sword, was also nearing his end, after you used all your strength to diagonally bisect the second-to-last Terminator. Grinning, you and the cold-faced Fulgrim almost subconsciously focused your icy gazes on the last remaining Terminator. Abaddon be praised, long live the Black Legion. However, just as this last remaining chaos, Astartes couldn't help but let out a deafening roar, intending to step forward and continue fighting you. Clap clap clap. A sudden burst of crisp applause suddenly reached everyone's ears. You quickly drove your Wraithbone power armor, turning your towering body, the blood scythe stained with fresh blood held firmly in your palm. The grim-faced Fulgrim also abandoned the slaughter of the last chaos Astartes, quickly turning his gaze towards the direction from which the sound came. At this moment, a Necron, whose appearance was clearly more advanced than a Cryptek, held a scepter, revealing his silver metallic body that was emitting a chilling aura. Tisk tisk, a double stroke of luck. If I could also add you to my collection, then all the losses I have suffered could be compensated for. The Necron, its eye sockets flashing with green light, slightly tilted its metallic head and said to you with great interest. Brother, if you don't want to return to the stasis field, we need to fight for our lives. He should be the master of this tomb world, the galaxy's thieving saint, the Necron overlord Trazyn. You took a deep breath and suddenly whispered to Fulgrim not far away. If the battle turns unfavorable, I will try my best to use the melta-bombs in my hand to create an opportunity for you to escape. Don't worry, in a way, I am immortal. At this moment, hearing your words, the grim-faced Fulgrim suddenly turned his head and stared at you. He didn't say anything extra, but slowly nodded his head. For the Emperor, brother, we fight side by side. Come on, for the Emperor. You took another deep breath. You gripped the blood scythe in your palm, letting out a deafening roar from deep within your chest. Loop N. You opened your tightly closed eyes, your expression slightly dazed. You immediately sensed the Wraithbone power armor you were wearing, as well as the green light-encircled blood scythe in your palm. You also had a scarred bolter on your waist. At this moment, having just taken a deep breath, you suddenly noticed, within your field of vision, a Necron Cryptek, exuding a cold luster all over his body, with glittering green lights in his eye sockets, opened his metal chimeric mouth. Where exactly did you crawl out from, out of which stasis field? You couldn't help but frown. You vaguely sensed that you seemed to have seen the scene before somewhere. However, facing an attack about to be launched by a Necron, you didn't have time to generate too many thoughts. You quickly activated your Wraithbone power armor, and the blood scythe, tightly gripped in your palm, instantly danced into a fleeting green halo. Chi-crack. In the next moment, accompanied by a crisp sound, the Cryptek's metallic head instantly soared into the sky, tumbling and crashing heavily onto the metal floor. The poor Cryptek has once again died under my scythe. Why did I say, again? You blinked your puzzled eyes slightly, murmuring thoughtfully, as you relentlessly drive the power armor made of vibranium, and vigorously wield the blood scythe. Fulgrim, with his pure white hair flowing in the wind, charged into the deepest part of the countless aliens like a purple phoenix spreading its wings. As the power sword he gripped tightly in his palm danced back and forth, the large number of surging alien monsters gradually turned into scattered pieces of flesh and blood all over the ground. You subconsciously took a deep breath and looked down at the blood scythe in your palm. You couldn't help but frown slightly. You still felt like you had seen the scene before somewhere or sometime. But you were absolutely certain that this was the first time you had met this elegant and handsome Primarch brother. Just then, Fulgrim, whose power sword blade was suddenly stained with blood, turned and walked towards you. I never thought I would meet a Primarch brother here. It seems our father still hasn't had a moment of peace. Fulgrim, whose facial skin seemed to be glowing, opened a pair of purple eyes and said to you in a slightly melancholy tone. Fulgrim, have we met before? I mean, on other battlefields in your memory. You slowly narrowed your eyes. You asked him without hesitation. Brother, I guarantee you in the name of the Emperor, this is definitely our first meeting. At this moment, Fulgrim, with a solemn expression, explained to you without any hesitation. Fulgrim, you and I will fight side by side for a period of time. You grinned and extended a hand encased in a vibranium shell towards him. Your hand and Fulgrim's clasped firmly together. You began to ask Fulgrim if he had any more memories of this unknown space before him. Fulgrim frowned slightly and told you that perhaps it was because he had been imprisoned in the stasis field for too long. He now only had vague impressions of many things. You nodded to show your understanding. Soon after, the two of you each looked for a direction and walked towards the metal passage that could lead away from this area. In the following period of time, the two of you fought side by side, facing countless crazy aliens chasing and intercepting you, and successfully left the maze-like special area. You quickly entered a garden area that resembled a small square. You and Fulgrim replenished some water from a fountain not far away. You squinted and stared at yourself in the reflection on the water surface, vaguely feeling that you had forgotten something important again. You chose to recover some strength and continued walking along the path you could find. Boom boom boom. However, at this moment, you and Fulgrim suddenly heard a burst of bolter fire in your ears. The two of you immediately gripped the weapons in your palms, drove the power armor, and crept towards the direction from which the sound came. You then saw 5 Terminators from the Black Legion being repeatedly besieged by a dozen Harlequins from the Eldar troop. You subconsciously introduced the origin of the Black Legion to Fulgrim beside you. When the other party heard that it was the Chaos Legion formed by Abaddon, the son of Warmaster Horus. Fulgrim, as if sighing, muttered to himself. He had seen that Astartes captain who always tied his hair in a sky-high braid many times, but he never thought that things would develop to this point. You didn't listen to Fulgrim's sigh. You frowned and stared at the two sides fighting. Just then, you suddenly turned your head and said to Fulgrim beside you. Fulgrim, I need you to trust my judgment. How about we kill the Chaos traitors first and leave the Eldar Harlequins for now? Brother, you choose to trust me, then I naturally trust you too. Go for it. Fulgrim, whose pure white hair was scattered on his ceramite shoulder armor, smiled slightly at you, and a huge palm gently patted your shoulder armor. In the next moment, you and Fulgrim, wielding bolters and the blood scythe, quickly rushed out of your hiding place. You ignored the countless crystal-throwing stars fired by the Eldar Harlequins, and without hesitation launched an overwhelming massacre against the Black Legion Terminators. The exquisite coordination of your two people's movements even made the Eldar Harlequins, who were dodging the bolter fire, subconsciously turn their eyes. Immediately afterwards, the Eldar Harlequins, after discovering that your target was not them, immediately cooperated with the two of you to launch a more fierce attack on the Black Legion Terminators. In just a few tens of seconds, 5 Terminator veterans who were enough to fight against countless aliens fell into a pool of blood. You took a deep breath and casually threw down a broken head that you had forcibly pulled out of the Terminator armor. And Fulgrim, who was standing next to you, held a power sword and stared at the Eldar Harlequins with an indifferent expression. You should be able to understand my words, so, who can tell us, how exactly do we leave this damn place? You drove the vibranium power armor forward and asked the Eldar Harlequins who had just lowered their melee weapons indifferently. After the 13 chimes disappear, the chaotic gods will return to their positions again, but the suffering sentient beings will eventually find it difficult to escape their predetermined fate. As her descendants, you are not awake enough, the time is not right, you are here too early again. An Eldar Harlequin, who was obviously the leader, shook his head slightly, wearing a strange mask. In the next second, it quickly raised the Eldar power weapon in its palm and swung it forward fiercely. However, when you and Fulgrim subconsciously raise the melee weapons in your palms, intending to engage in a fierce battle with the other party, you were surprised to find that every Eldar Harlequin actually swung the power weapon towards the position of their neck, and then forcibly chopped off their own head. You stared at the Eldar heads rolling on the ground and couldn't help but exchange glances with Fulgrim. Clap clap clap. Just then, a burst of applause as crisp as metal collision suddenly came from behind you. You and Fulgrim quickly turned around in your power armor, but instantly saw a Necron overlord holding a scepter slowly walking towards you. Trazyn, you gnashed your teeth and let out an angry roar from the depths of your throat. You, with a slight frown, drive the vibranium power armor, squatting on the metal floor. In your palm, you repeatedly play with a metal head belonging to a Necron tomb technician. At this moment, you have confirmed that you are trapped in Trazyn the Infinite's time loop. Hey, I don't even know when I fell for it. I guess I was trapped in the hypercube labyrinth the first time I saw Trazyn. You mutter to yourself with a sneer. You take a deep breath, trying to suppress the frustration welling up in your heart. You lower your head slightly, your gaze sweeping back and forth across the Necron remains lying on the metal floor, and an extremely thick metal catalog. You casually toss away the metal head, and instead pick up the metal catalog, examining it carefully. You seem to ignore the terrifying aliens that are gradually reviving around you, concentrating on memorizing the various patterns and texts inside. Moreover, it's less like you're trying to memorize than that you are guessing and speculating about Trazyn's personality and style. Soon after, accompanied by the terrifying roars of countless aliens, Fulgrim, whose movements are as graceful as a phoenix dancing, arrives as scheduled. After he has almost cleared all the alien creatures within his line of sight, you, holding the heavy catalog in your metal arm, drive the vibranium power armor forward. Before he can speak, you tell Fulgrim everything you know. So, this is already the countless time we've met. No wonder I always have a sense of familiarity. I always thought it was the stasis after effects of being imprisoned for too long. Fulgrim, his purple eyes widening slightly, nods to you with a stern expression. Then, brother, what do you plan to do about this battle? If everything develops as you say, the two of us working together may not be able to defeat this Necron overlord. A simple Necron overlord isn't that hard to kill. The problem is that Trazyn is too cunning. He's completely using the time technology in the hypercube labyrinth to trap us, otherwise even I alone could easily twist off his metal head. You narrow your eyes, and looking up at Fulgrim in front of you, you say in a deep voice. From the current situation, the trigger point for the time loop is when you and Fulgrim meet the Black Legion Terminators and the Harlequins. Perhaps there are other loop trigger points in the entire unknown space. But this requires you to gradually test it out with more time and methods. You then decide to stay in place with Fulgrim, even if the two of you will gradually be surrounded by countless alien creatures. After listening to the explanation, Fulgrim trusts your judgment without any hesitation. You immediately find a corner nearby, and the two of you stand shoulder to shoulder, back to back, and begin a valiant fight against the terrifying aliens that are gradually waking up. As time continues to pass, your two thick arms are already close to numbness, and the speed and power of wielding the blood scythe are gradually weakening. And Fulgrim relies on the powerful physique of a Primarch to bear the brunt of most of the frontal attacks. At this moment, his originally pure white long hair is splattered with a large amount of alien blood, and his ornately decorated purple gold power armor is also covered with countless battle damage marks left by the aliens. When the alien creatures in the entire area are close to the end of their mutual slaughter, countless fully armed Necrons begin to enter the metal aisle, performing special capture and imprisonment operations with practiced movements. You take a deep breath, and subconsciously exchange a glance with Fulgrim beside you. The two of you immediately grip the weapons in your palms, and launch another attack against the Necrons. Accompanied by the flying and falling of countless metal limbs, the number of Necrons begins to decrease rapidly. Before long, within your field of vision, the Necron overlord Trazyn gradually reveals his tall metal body. Can't you two be a little more obedient? Wouldn't it be better to stay with me in the stasis field? Why bother struggling here repeatedly? I can even design a unique display base for you, let you wear the most powerful power armor in the Imperium of Man, and fall into a slumbering state holding the best melee weapons. At this moment, Trazyn, shaking his metal head slightly, has a strong green light in his eye sockets. He tries his best to persuade you with a tempting mechanical voice. However, neither you nor Fulgrim are moved. Instead, You desperately drive your power armor, and quickly launch a terrifying charge towards Trazin's location with astonishing momentum. Tisk tisk, the unwavering tenacity of will is always an important point that I admire in you young humans. Trazin, holding the empathic obliterator in his metal hand, can't help but let out a sigh. He then raises the empathic obliterator high above his head, and fires beams of terrifying energy towards you, like blooming sunlight. Your keen vision also vaguely notices the metal 10 rings that once belonged to you jingling at his waist as he moves. At this moment, you don't have time to think more, you can only quickly adjust your charging steps, and dodge the incoming beams of energy with Fulgrim. Ha ha ha. In the next moment, Trazin, who is constantly making strange laughter, actually moves his metal feet quickly, and the empathic obliterator surrounded by green light is also swung wildly by him. Boom, accompanied by a deafening roar that resounds all around. The power sword that Fulgrim has been tightly gripping in his palm suddenly shatters and flies away, and then, he is heavily struck on the front of his purple-gold breastplate by the edge of the empathic obliterator. However, just as Fulgrim, whose ceramite armor is constantly breaking, sprays a large amount of blood from his mouth, and his entire tall body can't help but stagger backwards. You, who are about to reach Trazin, also suddenly spew out a large mouthful of pale golden blood. This sudden serious injury forces you to stop your charge, and reluctantly lean on the blood scythe, glaring at the Necron overlord Trazin not far away. Heh heh, fun, isn't it? This is why the empathic obliterator has become my personal weapon. Any intelligent creature that attacks me, as long as they have the same thoughts or goals, then randomly attacking one person is equivalent to dealing with a group of people. This is one of the precious technological relics left by the ancient race called the Old Ones. At this moment, the strands of green light in Trazin's eye sockets flicker faintly. He stares at the blood scythe you are holding tightly in your palm, and slowly shakes his head. Although I admit that the fighting will you are showing now is enough to match this weapon exclusive to the heroes of the Death Guard, but I'm sorry, little friend of the human race. You and that Primarch clone are still going to become one of my most precious collectibles. Heh heh, you, unable to resist a sneer, slowly stick out your tongue and lick the blood from the corner of your mouth. I say, Trazin, haven't you forgotten something? Then don't touch any weapons or equipment you've never seen before. At this moment, your voice had just faded. A palm covered in a vibranium shell suddenly opened outward. As the 5 fingers in your palm moved slightly, the metal rings hanging around Trazin's waist buzzed and began to emit a special energy filled with purple light. The next second, you suddenly raised your other vibranium palm and flung the blood scythe clenched in your hand towards Fulgrim, who was not far behind. Kacha, accompanied by a slight metallic collision. Fulgrim, who had already recovered from some of his serious injuries, widened his eyes, and a huge palm covered in purple gold ceramite unhesitatingly caught the green glowing blood scythe. He subconsciously let out an angry roar that echoed around him. For the Emperor. Immediately afterward, Fulgrim's entire massive body charged frantically towards Trazin like a purple whirlwind. At the same time, the metal rings that you had regained control of almost instantly detached from Trazin's waist. These rapidly rotating metal rings struck the Necron overlord metal body heavily, instantly tearing apart the living metal that the Necron race prided itself on. At this moment, Trazin, whose eyes flickered with a faint green light, quickly retreated. It wanted to temporarily avoid the attack of a perfect Primarch clone that was about to arrive, and also wanted to wield the empathic obliterator in its palm to block the repeated impacts of the countless metal rings. However, at this moment, you, who were once again driving the vibranium power armor to launch a terrifying charge, had also approached Trazin's body again within a few feet. While Fulgrim, who was close at hand, was rapidly wielding the blood scythe, launching continuous and rapid strikes at Trazin. Your 2 vibranium palms had already reached forward abruptly, almost grabbing the empathic obliterator belonging to Trazin. Let go. Your gaze stared fixedly at Trazin's green glowing metal eye sockets, and you gritted your teeth and squeezed out an angry roar. The next second, a vibranium magnetic boot, seemingly full of anger, suddenly lifted high from the ground and then heavily kicked Trazin's chest and abdomen. No, this is my perfect collection. My precious scepter, accompanied by a harsh friction sound of a metal limb suddenly breaking and shattering. Trazin, whose green glowing metal head subconsciously let out a miserable wail, flew backward like a metal target that had just been hit hard. Change source app close black lens bracket. And Fulgrim, who instantly seized the opportunity to attack, quickly stepped forward. The blood scythe that he had been tightly holding in his palm was almost danced into a dazzling green light that even your naked eyes could not distinguish. Chi chi chi. In just a few breaths, the Necron overlord Trazyn, who was still in midair, was forcibly decomposed into scattered living metal by countless dazzling green lights. Thud, you stared at Trazyn, who had completely lost his complete body, and slowly exhaled a breath. As if exhausted, you heavily rested the empathic obliterator clenched in your palm on the ground, making a dull collision sound. Immediately afterward, the purple glowing metal rings gathered above your power pack like tired birds returning to their nests, quickly forming a purple halo. At this moment, with the perfect cooperation of your Primarch brother Fulgrim, you actually managed to win a round against the Necron overlord Trazyn. In fact, before this encounter with Fulgrim, you, who were gradually awakening with your bestial instincts, had vaguely formed a hazy and blurred counterattack plan in your mind. You repeatedly speculated and analyzed the personality traits and behavior style of the Necron overlord Trazyn. You wanted to use the blind spots in the other party's thinking logic, or the numb mentality of being accustomed to collecting collectibles, to carry out an extra stimulation and interference, so as to gradually expose the other party's flaws or specific loopholes. You were actually betting on luck, and you didn't completely place all the wins and losses on this round. However, when you inadvertently noticed the metal rings collected by Trazyn around his waist, you didn't hesitate to decide to use this round to bet big. If successful, perhaps you and Fulgrim could get a chance to escape completely, and if you lose, it would just be restarting the next cycle. And as the number of cycles continues to increase, you, who possess bestial instincts, will quickly wake up and once again step onto the table of fate with the Necron overlord Trazyn. A body double of Trazyn has been completely destroyed, but we haven't entered the next cycle. It seems that the other trigger point is not on him. You took a deep breath. Your gaze fixed on Fulgrim, who was carrying the blood scythe and driving his power armor back. Two Primarchs spent a lot of thought and effort, but only destroyed a body double. It seems that this alien race of Necrons is far more complicated than I imagined. Fulgrim said to you with a solemn expression. Brother, this is one of the ancient races that stirred up the originally peaceful warp and even contributed greatly to the birth of Chaos Gods, not to mention they also. However, at this moment, just as you were about to briefly tell the unknowing Fulgrim about the glorious history of the Necrons. Buzz buzz buzz, accompanied by a deep tremor that seemed to brush across the soul level, one after another invisible barriers belonging to the Tesseract Labyrinth quickly peeled away from your and Fulgrim's perception. Hiss, you couldn't help but gasp, muttering to yourself. Why did Trazyn so easily open our time loop trap? I thought it would take more opportunities to figure out the entire Tesseract Labyrinth and find a real way to escape. At this moment, along with the complete disappearance of the Tesseract Labyrinth, you and Fulgrim actually returned to an alien containment area that had just completed repairs. Within your field of vision, a large number of Canoptech scarabs and countless Necron cryptechs were busily adjusting the state of the stasis fields, placing the various alien creatures inside. The next second, before you and Fulgrim could quickly increase your vigilance and grip the weapons in your palms. Within a radius of tens of kilometers, every Necron whose body surface flickered with the luster of living metal subconsciously turned their metal heads. Countless green gazes with no emotional fluctuations stared straight at you. The next moment, almost all the Necrons issued a terrifying roar like the collapse of the sky and the upheaval of the sea. Give me back my scepter. At this moment, you face countless Necron bodies that remain motionless, along with angry gazes locked firmly on you. You subconsciously swallow a mouthful of saliva that has just been secreted. Your gaze sweeps back and forth across the grand scene before you, and even you, who usually doesn't feel much fear, start to feel a little uneasy. Brother. Fulgrim, taking a slow, deep breath, stares at the countless Necrons before him. He suddenly speaks cautiously in your direction. How about we return the scepter to it first? Then we can think of a way to escape. Heh. Fulgrim, do you think that kind of method could possibly work? You can't help but chuckle, replying in a low voice. At this moment, strands of cold sweat trickle down between your grayish-white hair, stained with alien blood, washing conspicuous streaks across your cheeks. What are you waiting for? Run. In the next second, you, forcefully activating your vibranium power armor, suddenly let out a sharp, bizarre screech. In your palm, you hold the empathic obliterator, wreathed in green light, and the 10 halo rings above your power pack follow closely. You rapidly charge towards a direction where the number of Necrons is slightly less. At the same time, Fulgrim, hearing your loud shout, also speeds past you like a purple phoenix, violently swinging the blade of Sanguinius towards the Necrons in front. Chi chi chi. In the blink of an eye, a large number of Necrons' incomplete metal limbs and metal heads rise into the air, then fall heavily to the surrounding ground. Following closely behind, you grit your teeth and swing the empathic obliterator tightly gripped in your palm, heavily sweeping it across the Necrons who have gradually begun to riot wildly. Rumble rumble. In the next second, even if only the edge of the empathic obliterator barely grazed a Necron's metal body. Almost all of the Necrons who were rapidly closing in on you two were as if struck heavily by an invisible force out of nowhere. They either stagger backwards or are violently blasted away. Ha! No wonder Trazyn the Infinite went mad. The empathic obliterator's method of attack probably involves some kind of ancient super technology similar to the law of causality. It's even more precious than the two of us Gene's sons. While waving the empathic obliterator in your palm back and forth, you can't help but laugh loudly towards Fulgrim not far away. Brother, you should say less. Don't provoke that Necron overlord. Damn it, why does your crazy appearance remind me of Lehman Russ's suffocatingly ugly face? Haha, that's because I possess the heart of a wolf king. You laugh loudly while continuing to wield the irresistible empathic obliterator, half-jokingly shouting to Fulgrim. You actually rely on the martial power boost brought by this super scepter to far surpass Fulgrim, who is a Primarch clone, in the number of Necrons killed. Fulgrim, all clear the path. You cover our rear. You take a deep breath and shout without turning your head. At this moment, seeing that the number of Necron warriors continuing to surround you hasn't decreased much, and even large Necron units carrying Gauss flares and even heavy Gauss weapons have appeared in the metal corridors in the distance. You randomly pick a direction you remember and forcefully drive the vibranium power armor forward, launching a charge that is worth 1,000 soldiers. Almost every Necron struggles to withstand a second encounter with your empathic obliterator, and every time you launch an attack, you inflict irreparable and terrifying damage on even more Necrons. At the same time, Fulgrim, with a stern expression, also seems to have gradually become familiar with the feel of the blade of Sanguinius. The melee scythe tightly gripped in his palm is almost swung into a dazzling green halo. He can even occasionally rely on the blade of Sanguinius's hard material and the Primarch's perfect skills to forcibly deflect some of the Necrons' disintegration beams. Rumble rumble. Just then, accompanied by a thick green beam streaking across most of the containment area's sky. A large number of stasis field pedestals not far from you and Fulgrim are completely shattered, and many aliens who have just broken free from stasis don't even have time to stretch their limbs before being completely evaporated by the terrifying Gauss cannon. Fulgrim, be careful. Currently, nothing can truly withstand the firepower of the Necrons' heavy weapons. Evading with your own abilities is the only feasible method. You instantly widen your eyes, unable to resist loudly warning Fulgrim, who also widens his eyes. It seems that Trazyn, consumed by rage, has lost his mind. He no longer cares whether his collectibles are intact. You quickly drive the vibranium power armor forward, then suddenly raise the empathic obliterator in your palm high into the air. In the next second, rays of light as bright as the sun suddenly radiate outwards from the core of the empathic obliterator, firmly shining upon the Necrons controlling the Gauss cannon. However, unexpectedly, the brilliant beam emitted by the empathic obliterator seems to be just an ordinary energy beam, and it doesn't cause the slightest damage to any Necron. We've been tricked again. This seems to be an illusion that Trazyn often uses to confuse enemies. In the next second, your mind racing, you suddenly raise a palm, and those metal 10 rings originally suspended above the power pack launch a terrifying impact towards the Necron firepower units like self-guided missiles. Taking advantage of this opportunity, you and Fulgrim gradually create some distance from the main force of the Necrons. At this moment, the two of you have just arrived at a fork in the road with different directions. While casually summoning the metal 10 rings to your back, you turn your head and say to Fulgrim beside you. Fulgrim, I think Trazyn's Necron numbers are probably endless. We two alone can't successfully escape. Let's start recruiting people from the collection. Whether it's Chaos Aliens or Imperial combat teams, as long as we can communicate, how about forming a grand alliance of collectibles specifically targeting the Necron overlord Trazyn? Very good, brother, I trust your judgment. Let us overturn the entire tomb world together. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.